Chapter 1788. But really, she was really nervous about what she had just seen and what he had just said. Apart from being nervous, she was also looking forward to the upcoming engagement banquet. He looked at her and saw her exposed neck and shoulders. They were fair and delicate, like the graceful curve of a swan. Following the curve, he could see her beautiful fullness. Sexy and charming. Seducing his gaze, he became more and more eager to explore. However, he restrained himself and warned himself that now was not the time to do whatever he wanted. Usually at this time, his ambition would be revealed. He desperately hoped that after the engagement banquet, their wedding would proceed as soon as possible. He was already anxious to keep her as his own. How could he let others think about and covet her when she was so beautiful? What's the venue like? I'm really curious about how you decorated it. She asked with some anticipation, but he still pretended to be mysterious and blinked his eyes. You'll know when we reach the venue. You just have to wait quietly for the engagement banquet that I've prepared for you. Xianxia's lips suddenly curved slightly. His answer made her look forward to it even more, and her heart felt even sweeter. The carriages moved forward and soon arrived at the venue. However, just as she was about to get off the carriage, as if he could not bear for her toes to touch the ground, he carried her out of the carriage again in front of everyone's eyes. Xianxia hit his shoulder lightly but not hard. In her eyes, there was a hint of shyness. Put me down. You're making a joke out of yourself. Who dares to laugh at you? Wuxia asked her back. This made her even more embarrassed. However, as he said this, he still put her down. However, just as she steadied herself, the man's strong and warm hand held her hand without hesitation. Xianxia laughed in her heart. Was this man afraid that she would run away? But as she thought of this, her heart was still happy. At least, it meant that he cherished her, didn't it? From the man's details, she could see how important she was in his heart. When they arrived at the entrance of the venue and stepped on the red carpet, fireworks bloomed and fell on them. The innocent and romantic laughter of the flower girls standing on both sides of the red carpet quickly stirred up the atmosphere of the entire venue. Xianxia had a panoramic view of the entire venue. I like it so much. Especially that arch decorated with flowers. It was simply too romantic. In the past, when she watched movies, she was especially envious of couples standing under this romantic arch and receiving blessings. Xianxia secretly sighed in her heart. She let him hold her hand and walk towards the venue. Wuxia suddenly caught sight of Lu Jinyu, who was walking out of the venue. Lu Jinyu looked inexplicably nervous, as if he had something important to tell him. Wuxia couldn't help but stop and raise his eyebrows in confusion. Seeing that he had stopped walking, Xianxia also looked at him curiously. However, when she saw that he was looking into the distance, she followed his line of sight and looked at Lu Jinyu. Lu Jinyu walked over and said in a low voice, "Chief, there was news just now that an unidentified armed cargo ship forced its way to the port of the island. A few unidentified foreign men came down from the ship. I don't know what's going on at the moment, but I'm planning to go over and take a look." Chapter 1789. Wuxia's eyes were filled with suspicion, and his tone was filled with displeasure. "Didn't you order people to seal off this place? Why are there still people barging in?" "It's my fault. I've already sent people to guard this place, and the sea route is tightly sealed. I don't know the origin of this cargo ship. I've already sent people to stop them, but because those people are carrying weapons of mass destruction, there's been some conflict at the scene. I'm about to rush over to take a look at the situation." Wuxia's eyes darkened, and a gloomy expression appeared on his face. "You're saying that it's an armed cargo ship that forcefully docked at the port?" "Yes." "What other suspicious information do you have?" Lu Jinyu pondered for a moment and then replied, "Based on the information we have, it should be a cargo ship full of military munitions. As far as I know, such cargo ships are usually used by arms dealers to transport military munitions, and they are equipped with a large number of military munitions. These people are very aggressive, and it seems like they want to barge into the venue. However, I also suspect that they might be pirates who hijacked the cargo ship. But it's just a suspicion, and it hasn't been confirmed yet." Wuxia's heart skipped a beat. Arms dealers were businessmen or organizations that engaged in the trade of military munitions. Generally speaking, these business groups would use shipping to transport goods from the factory to the front line of the battlefield in order to fool others. Generally speaking, shipping was a more common method of transport. It was safe and carried large quantities. Generally speaking, cargo ships would be equipped with a large number of well-trained mercenaries. This was a private island. Although it was equipped with a relatively high level of security, it would definitely not be able to gain the upper hand if they were to deal with these people. Arms dealers, that was an organization that played with the flames of war. What could be more lethal than this? But why would an armed cargo ship barge in? The abilities of these people who came were really not small. Immediately he ordered, "Go over and take a look. If there's anything, report to me immediately." "I'll rush over to take a look now." Lu Jinyu rushed over as soon as he finished speaking. Xianxia saw that the two of them were nervous and alert as they talked, so she couldn't help but feel worried. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Don't worry." However, just as he finished speaking, the rumbling sound of an armed helicopter could be heard from afar. Wuxia raised his head abruptly and saw a helicopter approaching the venue from the direction of the port. All the guests couldn't help but panic. Looking at the helicopter of unknown origin that suddenly appeared in the sky above their heads, no one knew what was going on, and they were faintly panicking. The strong wind created by the propeller was like a tsunami, sweeping away the flowers and trees. Xianxia's skirt was also blown up by the strong wind. Wuxia immediately protected her behind him, handsome eyes cold, eyes vigilantly looking at the approaching plane. The helicopter slowly landed, and the cabin door was suddenly pushed open. At the cabin door, a tall and straight figure suddenly leaned out. His military windbreaker was fluttering in the wind, and his sleeves were fluttering. The man had one hand on the cabin door and the other on his hat. His casual posture could not hide his noble and arrogant demeanor. He raised his head slightly, revealing his incomparably handsome face to everyone's eyes. Chapter 1790. Wuxia's gaze turned cold. He was even more wary of this man's aggressiveness. Alas, when she caught sight of the man's handsome face, her breath caught in her throat and she could not make a sound for a moment. At the entrance of the helicopter, Gong Jie was dressed in a military trench coat. The sleeves of his coat fluttered in the wind, and a pair of snow-white military boots made him look even more handsome. His silver-white hair fluttered in the strong wind, constantly invading his arrogant and handsome face. The helicopter slowly made a forced landing. The wind and waves swept up sand and sand. The surrounding guests were either shocked or surprised as they gathered together and looked up at the godlike figure who seemed to have descended from the sky. Who is that? Gosh, isn't that a military helicopter? Who is that? Who is that man? He's so handsome. What a beautiful man. Look at his eyes. They're so mesmerizing. Xianxia watched the helicopter descend lower and lower. She widened her eyes in disbelief until she saw that familiar and devilish face. For a moment, an inexplicable bitterness and emotion welled up in her heart. Then, she covered her mouth with her trembling hands and cried tears of joy. "Xiaojie, he's here." She thought that he wouldn't show up at her engagement party. Xiaojie had said that the hatred of the Mu family's matricide had seeped into their bones and blood. It was impossible to get rid of it. The Gong and Mu families were irreconcilable. He would not object, but he would not attend her engagement party with the intention of giving her his blessings. Although he did not say it explicitly, she understood the meaning behind his words. Therefore, she had already mentally prepared herself to not have him at such an important moment in her life. She did not expect that he would appear. Like a god, he descended from the sky and appeared in front of her. Rumble, the helicopter's propellers whirred at high speed. A suspension ladder was suddenly lowered from the cabin's entrance. Gong Jie gracefully and nimbly descended the ladder. When he was 3 meters away from the ground, he abruptly let go of the handrail and landed suavely. With a leap, he landed steadily on the ground. Ah, that was so dangerous. Jumping down from such a high place is too scary. Everyone cried out in surprise. However, when he stood up straight, he took off the white military cap on his head and raised his head. His lips curled into an arrogant and enchanting arc. The aura that accompanied him seemed to be natural and noble. It was dangerous and domineering to the point of being unreasonable. The powerful aura instantly spread toward the crowd. It was impossible to resist it, stunning everyone at the scene. It was as if he was an innate king, causing others to involuntarily submit to him. Gong Jie quietly stood where he was. His eyes fell on Xianxia and he was suddenly shocked. However, there was a flash of emotion on his face and a gentle smile appeared on his face. Thank goodness! He wasn't too late. This time, he went to sign a bill and hurriedly loaded the goods. He didn't even have the time to send the batch of munitions to the battlefield, so he hurriedly changed his route and rushed here. She wanted to arrive at the venue on the day of the engagement banquet. Along the way, the cargo ship was unlucky. It suddenly encountered a thunderstorm and had to temporarily anchor at the port for a period of time to avoid the wind and rain. However, when he looked at the time, he was afraid that he would not be able to make it. Therefore, he did not wait for the thunderstorm to pass and hurriedly set sail again. Chapter 1791. The sea route on the island was completely sealed off. He had paid a huge price to break through the blockade and finally reach the port. When he reached the port, he tried to force his way to the shore but was stopped by the island's security personnel. When Gong Jie got off the cargo ship, he was immediately stopped. Even though he didn't care about the island's security arrangements at all. He had a group of powerful mercenaries with him. It would only take him a few minutes to break through the defenses and clear a path. However, today was his sister's happiest day. He didn't want to cause too much of a commotion and didn't want to be stained with blood on such a good day. Hence, he used the cargo ship's helicopter to rush all the way to the banquet venue. Fortunately, he wasn't late. At the most important moment, he arrived just in time. At first, he had a long internal struggle about whether or not to attend this engagement banquet. However, he couldn't let go of this feud that had seeped into his blood and bones. Not coming. However, he couldn't miss such an important day for his sister. He had already missed 15 years with her. How many more 15 years could he miss? If he didn't come, his sister would definitely be sad and upset, right? Ever since he could remember, Gong Jie could be said to be fearless. Even if he respected his father from the bottom of his heart, he was never afraid of him. However, the only thing he was afraid of was her tears. He couldn't stand by and watch her be disappointed and upset. Hence he came. He put down all his grudges and hatred and appeared here to give his sister his blessings at the most important moment. Gong Jie stood upright with one hand in his trouser pocket. The windbreaker on his shoulders fluttered in the wind, elongating his shadow. Wuxia narrowed his eyes and was a little suspicious of his identity. After secretly sizing him up, his gaze suddenly stopped at the armband on his windbreaker. The family seal of the Hurricane Group was engraved on the armband. Although Wuxia couldn't recognize who this handsome man in front of him was, he recognized the family seal at a glance. Hurricane Group. After his mind went blank for a few seconds, his gaze suddenly returned to Su Yangyi's face. A strange suspicion instantly floated into his mind. At first, he merely swept a glance at the man's face, but when he came back to his senses and scrutinized the man's face again, he was taken aback all of a sudden. Gong Jie had a particularly beautiful face. It was indeed inappropriate to describe a man as beautiful. However, it was not inappropriate to describe him. Gong Jie's skin was fair, but his eyes were as deep as a demon's. Especially his thick black eyelashes and dark pupils, it made him look even more enchanting. His thin lips were naturally curved in a devilish arc. Even if he wasn't smiling, the curled corners of his lips gave off a devilish and unruly impression. He was dressed in a long robe, and his face was devilishly charming. His short hair was as white as snow, and his sharp eyebrows made him look even more imposing. However, whether it was the charm or the outline of his facial features, they were extremely similar to Xianxia's imagination. If it wasn't for the aura, if the two of them stood together and changed into the same attire, it would be impossible to tell who was who. They were too alike. Hence, Wuxia couldn't help but suspect the identity of the man in front of him. Chapter 1792. However, Gong Jie didn't seem to notice Wuxia's silent scrutiny. Instead, he walked over to Xianxia. After he landed on the ground, the helicopter slowly rose into the air. However, it wasn't in a hurry to leave. Instead, it hovered about 30 meters above the ground. From the helicopter, it looked like it was raining. Countless flower petals fluttered down. So many rose petals? God, it's so beautiful. This feeling is as beautiful as a shower of petals. The sudden romance and surprise surprised everyone. Accompanied by the continuous exclamations, Gong Jie smiled as he slowly walked over to Xianxia amidst the shower of petals. Xianxia's heartbeat started to beat violently once again. In an instant, the rhythm of her heart was messed up. It wasn't until he was right in front of her that she came back to her senses. She blinked her eyes and a line of tears fell from her eyes. When Wuxia saw this scene, he furrowed his brows. The guess in his heart kept jumping. Hence, when Xianxia walked out from behind him and walked towards Gong Jie, he actually didn't stop her. Gong Jie looked at her. It was as if in this vast world, everything in the world was overshadowed. Only she was filled with vibrant colors. Other than her, no one else could enter his eyes. He stood still in front of her. Following which, he gently reached out his hand and tucked a strand of hair that had been messed up by the north wind behind her ear. "Sister, I'm late," Gong Jie said apologetically. His eyes curved as if he was smiling innocently, yet it also seemed like he was acting coquettishly towards her. However, when he saw the tears seeping out from the corners of her eyes, his heart ached as he knitted his brows. He said helplessly, "Sister? What's wrong with you?" She was actually crying. Xianxia pursed her lips and choked out in grievance, "I thought that I wouldn't see you. I thought you wouldn't be willing to come. Little fool. How could I not come to your engagement ceremony? But you didn't pick up my calls. I called you, but I was told that you weren't in the service area. I thought you were deliberately avoiding me." The more Xianxia spoke, the more aggrieved she felt. Tears welled up in her eyes. Seeing this, Gong Jie was even more at a loss. He hurriedly tried to stop her tears. His sister had loved to cry since she was young. In front of outsiders, she always liked to play the hero. Although she looked strong, her heart was extremely weak. When he heard that she had called him and he was not in the service area, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. "Sis, if you call my number, it will automatically cut off the signal after I leave the country. When I'm on business trips, I always use a satellite phone. So," Gong Jie smiled helplessly, his handsome eyebrows frowning weakly, but his eyes revealed indulgence and doting. "But look, who is the person standing in front of you now?" "Little Jie, so here I am. Although I'm a little late, I'm not too late. I didn't miss your most important moment." As Gong Jie spoke, he cupped her face gently and comforted her softly. "So, don't cry, okay? My dear sister, you're the most beautiful when you smile. Today is such an important day. It's not good to cry in front of so many people." Chapter 1793. As Gong Jie spoke, he gently cupped her face and softly coaxed her. "So, don't cry, okay? My dear sister, you're the most beautiful when you smile. Today is such an important day. It's not good to cry in front of so many people." A 24-year-old handsome man was actually trying his best to act cute in front of her, trying his best to make her laugh. Xianxia instantly broke into laughter and gently wiped away the moisture at the corner of her eyes. Seeing this, Gong Jie's gaze softened. "That's a good girl. Sister is the most beautiful when she smiles. I love the way you smile the most." Xianxia helplessly said, "Shao Jie, stop fooling around. Why do I feel like you're coaxing a child?" "What do you mean coaxing a child?" Gong Jie innocently pursed his lips and then curled his lips. "I'm coaxing my little princess." Then he suddenly gently lifted her hand, raised it, nodded, and planted a kiss on the back of her hand. He gave her a mysterious wink and coaxed her, "Sister, I'll cast a spell for you. Do you want to see it?" Xianxia turned around to look at Wuxia, only to see him standing there expressionlessly. However, there wasn't much enmity in his eyes towards Xianxia. She calmed down, and when she looked back, she curiously widened her eyes. What spell? Close your eyes. Xianxia immediately requested childishly. Xianxia was puzzled. Close my eyes? What are you trying to do? Close, close, close. If you don't close your eyes, how can I cast a spell? Xianxia acted like a child and said coquettishly. Xianxia couldn't argue with him and agreed a few times before obediently closing her eyes. She really closed her eyes tightly, so she couldn't see anything. However, after a while, she inexplicably felt a weight on her wrist, as if there was a touch of coldness on her skin. She was a little surprised and her eyelids moved. Xianxia immediately said, "No peeking." Xianxia obediently closed her eyes again. He didn't even dare to open his eyes secretly. After a long time, Xianxia said gently, "All right, open your eyes." Xianxia slowly opened her eyes. However, the moment she opened her eyes, a dazzling light leaped into her eyes. She was immediately attracted by this dazzling light. When she opened her eyes, she saw that a flower had been placed on her wrist. However, this flower was different from the others. Under the 3 blood-colored roses, there was a dazzling diamond. She didn't notice it at first glance because this diamond was embedded in the petals. Moreover, like a rose, its entire body was shining with a deep red. The blood-red resplendent diamond and the rose petals complemented each other. When she closed her eyes earlier, she suddenly felt her hands sink. It was because the resplendent diamond weighed at least 3 carats. Blood diamond? That was extremely rare and precious. A 1-carat blood diamond was already extremely precious. A 3-carat blood diamond could be described as priceless. Don't look down on this 3-carat diamond. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that it was a priceless treasure. In a London auction, a 0.9-carat blood diamond was auctioned for a sky-high price of 500 million. Chapter 1794. Xianxia's eyes widened in shock. She was so stunned that she could not speak. She reached out and gently stroked the diamond's surface. She could tell that the diamond had just been processed. The cut surface was a little blunt, so it was obvious that it had just been cut. Xianxia was so touched that she couldn't speak. She didn't know where the diamond came from. Do you like it? Xianxia looked at her nervously, afraid that she would say, "Don't like it," and he wouldn't know what to do. This gift was part of the Gong family's collection. Back then, when his father was selling arms in the Middle East, he sold a batch of weapons to a local terrorist organization. The terrorist organization couldn't come up with enough US dollars, so they gave him a blood diamond as a reward. The terrorist leader didn't recognize the treasure, but that didn't mean that Gong Xiaoying didn't recognize it. This blood diamond couldn't be compared to a normal diamond. After he brought it back, he kept it as a treasure. This blood diamond was rare and precious. In fact, this blood diamond was 4 carats. After carving it, it was reduced to 3 carats. There was no other 4-carat blood diamond in the world. Even if there was one, it hadn't appeared yet. Before the second one appeared, the blood diamond in Xianxia's hand was the real king of diamonds. Xianxia took the blood diamond that his father had carefully collected from Zhenbao Pavilion and ordered the designer to design and carve it overnight. Finally, on the way here, he used fresh rose petals to decorate the blood diamond into a bracelet so that he could personally wear the bracelet on her wrist. Xianxia was so touched that she couldn't speak. Just by looking at the design of the blood diamond, she knew that this guy had spent a lot of effort on it. "I like it a lot." Xianxia nodded. The satisfaction on her face wasn't fake at all. She sincerely expressed her love for it. She raised her head and said with a smile, "Actually, the fact that you're here is the best gift you can give me. Nothing else is as important as you coming. I definitely won't miss sister's engagement. Not only that, I won't miss any important occasions in the future." He spoke seriously and there was no trace of a joke on his face. Instead, it was extremely sincere. "However, I have another reason for coming here." As Xianxia spoke, he suddenly raised his cold gaze and looked at the man behind Xianxia. He looked at Wuxia, but his gaze was no longer as gentle and docile as it was when he faced Xianxia. Instead, it was piercingly cold and sharp. It was cold, scrutinizing, and directly pressuring. Mu Yaja also looked at him without any intention of backing down. Two pairs of eyes met in midair. Invisible sparks flew from the collision, like a smokeless war. At that time, the two men looked at each other, but it was more like a battle between kings. Their eyes met, but it was more like a confrontation. The collision of the two men's auras created a strong magnetic field that almost shook the earth. In the end, Gong Jie was the first to break the strange silence with a smile. Mu Yaja, do you know who I am? If I'm not wrong, Mu Yaja's voice paused slightly, but his eyes were still cold. Hurricane Group. Chapter 1795. Oh, I'm sorry, but you guessed wrong. Gong Jie, on the other hand, had a look of pity on his face as he shook his finger. While Mu Yaja was puzzled, Gong Jie suddenly reached out and hugged Xianxia's shoulder. He said to him mischievously, I'm not here today as a member of Hurricane Group. Instead, I'm here as my sister's younger brother to attend this engagement ceremony. The corner of Mu Yaja's eyes twitched fiercely. However, he heard Gong Jie say in a lazy tone, Ayaya, let me think. Actually, you should call me brother-in-law, right? Xianxia was instantly amused by his mischievous tone. Mu Yaja's expression became even more strange. Could he imagine an enemy who had always been on the opposite side smiling and asking him to call him brother-in-law? Even though he was mentally prepared for Gong Jie to be Xianxia's younger brother, he was still caught off guard. Although the siblings looked similar, if not for their different attire, height, and dressing, it would be difficult to tell who was who. However, Gong Jie calling him brother-in-law still confused a certain man. Xianxia said helplessly, Shao Jie, sister. I didn't say anything wrong. Gong Jie said coquettishly, I'm your younger brother. Since that's the case, shouldn't he call me brother-in-law? Xianxia raised both hands and compromised. Okay. Yes, you're right. He should call you brother-in-law. Gong Jie had an I knew it expression. Then he raised his chin at Mu Yaja in an incomparably calm manner. As if out of some kind of provocation, he grinned and said, Since my sister has said so, shouldn't you call me brother-in-law? Sure. Mu Yaja also smiled elegantly. Then he raised his eyebrows in a somewhat provocative manner and said, But before that, shouldn't you call me brother-in-law? Half a second after he said that, Gong Jie smiled and blurted out, Brother-in-law. Mu Yaja, Gong Jie laughed in his heart. It wasn't difficult for him to call him brother-in-law. Since he had come here, he had already prepared himself mentally. Even though he was well aware of the identity of the man in front of him, and that the blood of the person he hated the most flowed in his veins, he was willing to temporarily bury the hatchet for his sister. At least for now, he could let go of all hatred and face it calmly. Mu Yaja gritted his teeth and unwillingly snorted. Brother-in-law. Gong Jie seemed to be deliberately making things difficult for him as he said faintly, Brother-in-law, you don't seem to want to acknowledge me as your brother-in-law. Mu Yaja, but it's okay. This isn't the main point of my visit. Gong Jie paused. Suddenly, he let go of Xianxia's shoulder and strode toward him. He only stopped when he was standing in front of Mu Yaja. The two men faced each other. They had the same height and aura. When they confronted each other, they were evenly matched. Gong Jie looked at Mu Yaja coldly. He narrowed his eyes and his gaze suddenly turned cold. He said in a low voice that Xianxia couldn't hear clearly, I'm here to warn you. If you dare to bully my sister and let her suffer even the slightest grievance, I'll destroy your Mu group. Chapter 1796. He didn't hear anything else, but the words, flatten the Mu group, were loud and clear, and he heard it clearly. A question popped up in Xianxia's mind. Who is this guy? What an arrogant tone. Flatten Mu Corporation? What kind of courage does he have to make such a threat in front of boss? Is he here to cause trouble for the engagement ceremony? Xianxia walked forward with a cold expression, but Mu Yaja raised his hand to stop him. Boss? Xianxia was puzzled, but he didn't know why Mu Yaja stopped him. Lu Jinyu, who had rushed over, was also shocked to see this scene. He didn't hear what kind of provocation Gong Jie had said, but just by looking at his unfriendly attitude, he could tell that he had come with ill intentions. Mu Yaja's face darkened slightly, but he didn't say a word. Gong Jie stared at him like a tiger watching its prey, like a lion, defending his sister's happiness. Yun Shishir was marrying this man. Sure, he was willing to believe in his sister's judgment and choice. As her younger brother, even if he was worried, he had no right to interfere. However, his sister's happiness was the only bottom line that could not be crossed. His principle was to defend his sister's happiness. Just like how Yu had questioned Mu Yaja back then, what kind of reason did a person rely on to become stronger? His answer was the same as Yu's. That was to protect the person he loved. Yun Shishir was the person he loved the most. In order to protect her happiness, he naturally wouldn't shirk his responsibility. Gong Jie stared at him silently and didn't say a word. He was waiting to see how Mu Yaja would respond. After a long period of dead silence, as if a century had passed, Mu Yaja suddenly smiled and said, "Flatten Mu Corporation?" Gong Jie raised his eyebrows and didn't say anything. However, the emotion in his eyes was a silent warning. Since he could say such words, it meant that he could do what he said. Mu Yaja didn't have much of an expression on his face. He just faintly expressed his regret. "I'm sorry. I don't think you'll have the chance." After he finished speaking, his lips curled into a smile, but he was extremely conceited. Since he had decided to marry her, he would pamper her for the rest of her life. Regardless of birth, old age, sickness or death, regardless of wealth or wealth. Similarly, cherishing this woman was his bottom line as her husband. "I don't need you to remind me of that." When Gong Jie heard this, he smiled and raised his eyebrows. Obviously, he was very satisfied with his response. "That's the best." Yun Shishir looked over curiously. She couldn't understand the invisible confrontation between the two men. Gong Jie turned and looked at her. Then he smiled and naturally hooked his arm around Mu Yaja's shoulder. "I just had a friendly conversation with my brother-in-law." Mu Yaja was speechless. "Friendly?" He said, "Flatten Mu Corporation, in a friendly manner?" The corners of Mu Yaja's eyes twitched. Yun Shishir obviously didn't believe him. She said suspiciously, "But I saw your expression just now. You looked very fierce." Gong Jie said truthfully, "Yes. Just now, I was threatening my dear brother-in-law. If he doesn't treat you well, I'll flatten Mu Corporation." Yun Shishir was stunned for a moment. She thought that he was joking and immediately said, "Shao Jie, stop fooling around." Chapter 1797. Yun Shishir didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "With a clown like you backing me up, your brother-in-law definitely won't dare to bully me. But isn't it a little too exaggerated to say that you'll wipe out the Mu group? Although I know you're joking, your brother-in-law might think that you're a terrorist if he doesn't know." The corners of his lips twitched violently as he felt a pang of guilt. His words came true. He really panicked. "My dear sister, how did you know that your brother is a terrorist? Could it be the legendary telepathy?" Gong Jie immediately dispelled his doubts. She must be joking. He hid his identity so well. How could she know that he was a terrorist? But strictly speaking, he wasn't a real terrorist. He was just a little more awesome than terrorists, just a level higher. It could be said that if the Hurricane Group stopped the large-scale weapons shipments to the Middle East, it could be said that more than half of the world's terrorists could close down at home and have nothing to do. As the Hurricane Group that dominated the world's war situation, how could terrorists compete with it? Gong Jie immediately changed the topic coquettishly. "What? Sister, you actually said that your brother is like a terrorist. I'm so sad." Yun Shishir smiled helplessly. "Who asked you to speak like a terrorist?" Gong Jie was speechless. He was used to speaking like this and couldn't change it. But sister was biased. She was obviously protecting his brother-in-law. He felt so wronged. Gong Jie glared at Mu Yaja angrily. Mu Yaja felt a murderous gaze on him. When he looked back, he met Gong Jie's resentful gaze. The two men's gazes met again in midair and there was a burst of electromagnetic sparks. Mu Yaja glanced at Gong Jie and then smiled. He said in a low voice, "Don't worry, I know that my brother-in-law is joking." He said that because he's afraid that you'll be wronged, so I won't take it seriously. Although he said that, a certain man couldn't help but silently criticize in his heart. To be honest, he was actually quite curious. Although the man in front of him was young, his tone was arrogant and he actually dared to threaten him. Actually, he really wanted to see for himself what kind of means and capabilities this man had to be able to flatten the Mu group overnight. He knew this man's identity. He was from the Hurricane group and had extraordinary capabilities. But the Mu group couldn't be wiped out by the Hurricane group overnight. Did he think that the Mu group was weak? How could they be so weak that they couldn't even withstand a single blow? Jiang Shen and Lu Jinyu were perplexed. They exchanged glances, but neither of them knew what was going on. Brother-in-law? Sister? Brother-in-law? They were totally to be confused. What was going on right now? Up to Gong Jie and Jiang were similar? Jiang to Yun, Gong Jie, to look. Then to Yun's. To Toot. To Jiang, he to look. His biological siblings? Lu Jinyu pointed at Gong Jie in surprise. Could it be that this man who appeared out of nowhere is sister-in-law's brother? Yun Shirshir smiled awkwardly. Yes, he's my brother. What's wrong? We do look alike. Yun Shirshir explained, we're twins, so it's normal that we look alike. Chapter 1798. Twins? Then they were siblings. Jiang Shen was confused. He suddenly interrupted, cleared his throat, and pointed at the helicopter hovering in the sky. Moreover, a burly mercenary was standing at the cabin door, scattering flower petals like a celestial maiden. He asked quietly, whose helicopter is this? Gong Jie said calmly, it's mine. Yours? Jiang Shen pondered for a moment. Then he suddenly thought of something. Then he asked quietly, in that case, the armed cargo ship that forcefully broke through the blockade and docked at the port is also yours? It's mine. Gong Jie broke out in cold sweat and felt guilty. Then, he said righteously, but what do you mean by an armed cargo ship? It's obviously an ordinary cruise ship. Don't talk nonsense. An ordinary cruise ship? Jiang Shen narrowed his eyes suspiciously and sized him up. *CK. Did he really think he was retarded? How could he not tell a cruise ship from a cargo ship? Moreover, who would stuff hundreds of containers full of firearms on a cruise ship? Also, how could an ordinary cruise ship forcefully break through the blockade of the route and dock at the port? Moreover, who had seen a cruise ship equipped with long-range missiles and large-scale cannons? Who had seen it before? Who had seen it before? This guy was lying through his teeth. Jiang Shen said, sister-in-law, your brother can't be. He was probably an arms dealer. Gong Jie snorted coldly. Today is my sister's big day. That's why I came all the way here. Yun Shirshir also asked suspiciously, Shao Jie, is this cruise ship yours? Gong Jie was stunned for a moment, then said, it's mine. Yun Shirshir asked again, what do you do for a living? I'm a businessman. I have a few private ships to carry goods. Jiang Shen sneered silently in his heart. He was a businessman. There was nothing wrong with that. He was just an unscrupulous businessman. When Yu and Xiao Yichen arrived, they saw Gong Jie in a trench coat standing beside Yun Shirshir from afar. The corners of their eyes twitched and their hearts skipped a beat. Why did this guy rush over? How did he get here? Suddenly he realized that he had heard that an armed cargo ship had broken through the blockade and was anchored at the private port of the island. Could it be that this was his doing? Yu rubbed her forehead helplessly. Did this uncle of hers have to be so high profile? Upon hearing the commotion, Yun Yeqing and Yun Yeho walked out as well. According to the procedure, the next step would be for Yun Yeqing to hold her hand and hand it over to Mu Yaja. For this reason, he deliberately wore a well-ironed suit. Although he was slightly older and had experienced many changes in the past few years, he still deliberately dressed himself up on such a rare occasion. He looked very presentable. However, when he walked out, he saw Yun Shirshir standing together with an unfamiliar yet familiar man. He was immediately confused. The reason why he said he was unfamiliar was because he had never seen this man before. He said he was familiar because he looked similar to Yun Shirshir, especially that pair of eyes. It was as if they were cast from the same mold. This is? Chapter 1799. Gong Jie turned around and saw Yun Yeqing in a suit. Upon hearing Yun Shishir's introduction, he was stunned for a moment and did not react in time. Father. Suddenly, he came back to his senses and understood that this so-called father was probably referring to her adoptive father. Yun Shishir continued, when I was 9 years old, he was the one who brought me back to the Yun family and adopted me at the welfare center. Although he's my adoptive father, he's always treated me like his own. Even though I'm not his biological father, he's never mistreated me in any way. In my heart, he's my father. Xiao Jie, you should call him uncle? Gong Jie nodded obediently at his mother's words. Following her wishes, he greeted the man meekly, "Hello, uncle." He was used to being high and mighty. Unless it was in front of his father, he would never bow his head to anyone. However, this ordinary man in front of him was different. He was his sister's adoptive father. Since she said that he had always treated her like his own all these years, then he would be grateful to anyone who treated his sister well. After all, this man had taken over the role of a father to take care of his sister all these years. At least, he had saved her from being homeless. Just based on this point alone, he acknowledged it. Thus, this uncle was a sincere greeting from the bottom of his heart. Mu Yaja, who was standing at the side, was silent. This Gong Jie might seem arrogant and unruly on the surface, like a young and aggressive leopard, but in front of Yun Shishir, he was as docile and adorable as a little lamb. This contrast, it was simply too much. Yu Yu's lips twitched as well. This uncle of his was a classic sisterkun. He would do whatever his mommy said and would never refute her. He was extremely docile. He was a little uncomfortable. Recalling Gong Jie's domineering and unruly style on a daily basis, and then looking at this man who was like a little lamb right now, the little lad could not help feeling flustered. Xiao Yichen, who was standing at the side, commented quietly, "This man looks so much like mommy." Yu Yu said, "You should call this man uncle." Uncle? Xiao Yichen was puzzled. Idiot. Because he's mommy's younger brother. Mommy has a younger brother? And they're twins. Twins. Isn't that the same as us? Xiao Yichen then said, "This man is quite handsome." Good genes, nothing can be done about it. Yun Yeqing looked at the Gong Jie and smiled courteously. He then rubbed his hands nervously and looked at Yun Shishir inquiringly. "Shishir, Dad, this is my little brother. When I was 9 years old, I was separated from him because of a car accident. I haven't heard from you for 15 years, but the heavens are kind enough to let us meet again." Yun Shishir replied, but her face was filled with joy. She did not have the chance to introduce her father to Xiao Jie because she was worried that he would not approve of him. Alas, it turned out that her worries were unnecessary. Yun Yeqing chuckled when he heard that. "Sure. Great. This means that we're destined to be siblings." The car accident you're talking about? Yun Shishir said helplessly, "I'll go back and explain it to you later. It's complicated." Chapter 1800. However, this man's identity was worth investigating. Lu Jinyu took another look at Gong Jie and was stunned for a few seconds when he caught sight of the epaulets on the latter's windbreaker. The symbol of this epaulet was very familiar. Hurricane Group? Lu Jinyu's face turned pale when he realized what was going on. Hurricane Group, wasn't that the #1 military group that caused the entire world to tremble in fear? It was said that they were so powerful that they could make the world tremble with a stomp of their feet. Their influence was terrifying. The Mu Group's power was obvious to all in the world. If one had to describe it, the world's financial system would fall into a state of depression with just a few sneezes from the Mu Group. However, the Hurricane Group was different. The Hurricane Group was a powerful family that controlled the world's war. It could be said that 70% of the world's weapons came from the Hurricane Group's military factories. The Gong family's every move was directly related to the direction of the war. All the wars in the world ended because of them, and they also started because of them. The world's financial system was in crisis, but the war never stopped. It could be said that the Hurricane Group was growing stronger and stronger, and it was a family that was feared by many. Lu Jinyu couldn't help but feel confused. Sister-in-law's younger brother was actually from the Hurricane group. Who exactly was he? Judging from his momentum, he seemed to be of an extraordinary status. Could he be a core member of the Gong family? Xianxia whispered, Jinyu, could this be someone from the Hurricane group? Lu Jinyu said gloomily, judging from his stance, it can't be wrong. It seems like he's from the Gong family. In that case, sister-in-law's maternal family is also very powerful. But sister-in-law doesn't seem to know her younger brother's identity. It's a little strange. Boss is in trouble. He thought that he had married a little white rabbit, but it turns out that this little white rabbit has a group of lions behind her. Lu Jinyu suddenly mourned for Wuxia for a few seconds and then said, if sister-in-law is from the Gong family, then her maternal family is indeed difficult to deal with. Jiang Shen's heart also ached for Wuxia as he observed a few seconds of silence. His heart ached for his boss for a second. Wuxia looked at them coldly, but he didn't know what these two fellows were silently criticizing him about. He glared at Zhang Xian as a warning. Lu Jinyu and Jiang Shen cleared their throats in unison, feeling a little awkward. He told Yun Shishir, it's getting late. Since everyone is here, it's time to start the ceremony. Then he walked over and wanted to hold Yun Shishir's hand. Gong Jie said politely, hello, uncle. I have something to discuss with you. Yun Yeqing was slightly unaccustomed to his gentleness, so he asked politely, what's the matter? Gong Jie lowered his head and glanced at Yun Shishir beside him. Then he smiled gently and asked, can I take my sister's place at the engagement ceremony today? Gong Jie clasped his hands together like a child. Please, please. This is a wish that I've been wanting to fulfill for the past 15 years. I hope that you can fulfill it for me. The reason why he had risked his life to rush all the way here at all costs was so that he could hold Yun Shishir's hand and walk through the ceremony with her. This was also his wish. Chapter 1801. Gong Jie then sought his sister's opinion. Sis, can I? I want to hold your arm as we enter the venue. Of course. Yun Yeqing agreed. Great, great. Since you're her brother, it's Shishir's wish for you to hold Shishir's arm as she enters the venue on such a special day. Of course, I'm happy for you. Thank you, uncle. Gong Jie smiled as happily as a child. He suddenly thought of something and took out his walkie-talkie to give an order. Withdraw the helicopter and don't disturb the order of the venue. Everyone, stay on the ship and listen to my orders. Don't move without my permission. Roger, sir. Gong Jie put away the walkie-talkie and gently held Yun Shishir's soft hand. He smiled at her. Sis, let's go. Okay. Gong Jie then led her slowly down the red carpet. Lu Jinyu and Jiang Shen then hurriedly immersed themselves in the ceremony. When Gong Jie and Yun Shishir appeared at the end of the red carpet, the sacred music played again. All the guests in their seats stood up in unison and looked in their direction. They were either looking at the bride-to-be with anticipation or blessing. Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen followed behind obediently. The two little guys walked up to Yun Shishir and silently lifted the hem of her gown that was spread out on the floor. A group of cute little flower girls standing in 2 rows walked up with flower baskets in their hands. The flower baskets were filled with fresh and tender rose petals. They wore pink gauze dresses and had small and cute angel wings on their backs. They were as cute as angels, just like the incarnation of Cupid, the god of love. The flower girls walked on both sides. Before the engagement ceremony, these cute little Lolas had undergone some training. Hence, when Yun Shishir and Gong Jie appeared on the red carpet, they grabbed the petals in their baskets and sprinkled them over Yun Shishir's head. Some of the flower girls were especially pretty and adorable. They had blonde hair, blue eyes, deep-set brows, and exquisite European features. Some of the flower girls were the guests' children. They had black hair and amber eyes, but after dressing up, they were extremely beautiful. However, gradually, these flower girls saw Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen behind Yun Shishir. They curiously surrounded them and asked in their childish voices, "What's your name?" Yu Yu pouted and ignored them. She proudly turned her face to the side. Those little flower girls, however, persevered and went to the other side. While scattering petals, they smiled and said, "Can we be friends?" Yu Yu proudly ignored them. Xianxia, however, liked to play with girls. Hence, he said, his name is Yu. Yu glared at him. Why did you betray me? Idiot Yu, how can you bear to reject such a cute girl? Xianxia lectured in all seriousness. Mommy said that you have to be gentle with girls. Yu was speechless. When the guests saw these adorable children interacting so innocently and heard Xianxia sternly say, you have to be gentle with girls, they were amused. These little guys are so adorable. That's right. These two children are so handsome. Look at them. They're wearing suits and look as elegant as gentlemen. Chapter 1802. When Xianxia appeared in front of all the guests in her splendid attire, they were deeply impressed by her beauty. She's too beautiful. Many of the guests had many hazy fantasies about the bride on their way here. Now that they saw it with their own eyes, they were deeply moved. Perhaps, strictly speaking, Xianxia was not the most beautiful bride they had ever seen, but she was the most elegant woman. Some people were beautiful, but this beauty was empty and soulless, like a porcelain doll that had a surface but no soul. Xianxia's beauty, however, was not limited to the surface. It was a beauty that bloomed from the inside out. Her luxurious gown was like a blooming rose. The ingenious design, not to mention the priceless jewelry on her body, accentuated her otherworldly beauty. Because of her presence, the entire venue became dreamy and illusory, like a fairyland. Her beauty made everyone gasp in admiration. Someone noticed the bouquet on Xianxia's hand. Even from afar, one could see the dazzling blood diamond. Do you see the diamond on the bride-to-be's hand? It's so beautiful. It's as red as blood. It's so mesmerizing. That's a blood diamond. It's very rare. Even a carat of it is very expensive. It's basically something that can only be found by chance. This small one is priceless. Blood diamonds are the noblest among diamonds. Also, this diamond doesn't look small. It's about 3 carats. The craftsmanship of the carving is uncanny. It looks like the raw stone should be even bigger. What extravagance! Someone with sharp eyes was able to estimate the weight of the diamond at a glance. Yun Qingmiao and Yun Qinli were also stunned by Xianxia's expensive outfit. At first, they snorted disdainfully when they saw Xianxia's gown. They thought to themselves, marrying into a rich family is indeed different. Not to mention his outfit, just the accessories on his body alone would be enough to blind them. His heart was filled with envy and jealousy. However, it was out of his reach. However, when they noticed the bouquet on Xianxia's wrist, their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. They did not know how precious a blood diamond was. In comparison, this dazzling diamond was dazzling and mesmerizing. Which girl did not like diamonds? There was no way they could resist diamonds. Who could be as lucky as Xianxia to be doted on by everyone? Therefore, most people could only look at her in envy. When Yun Qingmiao saw the man holding Xianxia's arm, her eyes widened in shock and amazement. Qinli, look at the man beside Xixia, he's so handsome. He's better looking than many celebrities on TV. I don't think so. I think brother-in-law is more handsome than him. Although Yun Qinli said this, she still looked at him with admiration. But Brother Mu is already taken. You'd better stop thinking about it. This man looks quite similar to Xixia. Xianxia suddenly said from the side. Yun Qingmiao was surprised. She did a close comparison and found that the man looked very similar to Xianxia. She had never heard of such a person before, though. Chapter 1803. Yun Qingmiao chimed in. Judging from his attire, he should be a wealthy and respectable figure. Perhaps he's also a big shot with a powerful background. Yun Qinli was a little jealous, so much so that the way she looked at Xianxia changed. Indeed, one could not compare with another. She envied Xianxia's good fortune. Initially, she was jealous that she had the opportunity to go to university, had a high academic qualification, and was born in the city. She was like a rich young lady who lived a life of luxury and did not have to worry about food and clothing. Later, when she met Xianxia's fiancé, she muttered to herself how she had met such a good man. He had an extraordinary background, a respectable family background, and a handsome face. She could not figure it out. How could she have met so many lucky people? In Yun Qingli's heart, Yun Shishir was like a princess who had been spoiled by the heavens. With so much love on her, she did not have to worry about living an ignoble life. Now, however, it was only at the engagement ceremony that she was truly defeated. Yun Qinli could no longer suppress the sense of defeat in her heart. Feeling unbalanced, she bit her lip and kept looking at the backs of Yun Shishir and Gong Jie. Under everyone's gaze, Gong Jie held Yun Shishir's arm as they walked to the flower arch. Then, they stopped in their tracks and stood there with a smile. Lu Jinyu walked over in a formal suit. He was in charge of this engagement banquet. As the MC of Mu Yaja's engagement banquet, he naturally felt honored. Therefore, he had gone through the script several times until Mu Yaja was satisfied with it. In many weddings, the opening speech was very emotional, but if it was too emotional, it would inevitably appear a little pretentious. With the microphone in hand, Lu Jinyu's concise and humorous opening speech pushed the atmosphere in the venue to a climax, driving the guests' emotions to a high. As a key figure in Xinyu Financial Corporation's board meetings, Lu Jinyu naturally did not have stage fright or shyness, but he could not help but feel a little nervous before going on stage. After all, it was different from the past. Today, he was going to make an opening speech. It was Big Boss's engagement party. He would be lying if he said that he wasn't nervous. If he messed up, his boss would definitely not let him off. Not only would his bonus be deducted, but he would also have to pay for his marriage. Therefore, he attached great importance to it. But when he went up on stage, he quickly blended into the happy and warm atmosphere. With excitement in his heart, he gradually unfolded the lines that he had memorized overnight. Yun Shishir held onto Gong Jie's arm. From the beginning to the end, her smile was gentle. Her gentleness was infectious and made people feel exceptionally warm. The atmosphere at the scene gradually increased. Lu Jinyu smiled and said, "Next, I would like to invite all distinguished guests to witness this most sacred moment together. Let's welcome our groom-to-be." Ceremonial music sounded. Under Yun Shishir's smiling gaze, Mu Yaja slowly walked towards her with flowers in his hands, welcomed by a group of little flower girls. At this moment, Yun Shishir suddenly became uncontrollably nervous. So much so that Gong Jie, who was standing beside her, could feel her extremely stiff hands. "Xiao Jie, what should I do?" "I'm a little nervous," she said secretly, but her face was red and she had some difficulty breathing. Gong Jie did not know whether to laugh or cry. He said, "Why are you nervous? Are you afraid that the groom-to-be will run away at the last minute?" Chapter 1804. "Alright, be good. Don't be nervous," he said gently as he patted the back of her hand to comfort her. It was like a form of encouragement, as though he was telling her not to be nervous because he was here. Yun Shishir looked up and exchanged glances with him. She took a deep breath, and only then did she feel less nervous. In the blink of an eye, Mu Yaja was already in front of her. All the guests stood up and applauded. His group of brothers stood at the side excitedly and whistled. They were obviously very excited. Mu Yaja turned slightly and put a finger to his lips, indicating for everyone to keep quiet. Everyone quietened down in an instant. He turned around and looked at her. His gaze was deep and gentle as he said, "Do you know? I've been waiting for you for 28 years for this moment." Yun Shishir was stunned and looked at him in disbelief. Gong Jie looked at him silently, but his lips curved slightly and he did not say anything. Mu Yaja's thin lips curved into a charming smile, but he asked gently, "Do you believe in love at first sight?" Yun Shishir pursed her lips and nodded. Her eyes were a little hot. "I believe in it." She had always believed that love at first sight was a fated encounter. "At first, I didn't believe in it," Mu Yaja continued, "but when I met you, I felt that you belonged to me. Luckily, it wasn't too late to meet you. I wasn't late." Yun Shishir was so shocked that she almost suffocated. He rarely said words of love, but today, in front of everyone, he actually said such words of love that made one's heart skip a beat. Yun Shishir's face turned red, but her eyes were slightly moist because of it. Mu Yaja said slowly, "Thank you for making me believe in fate." As soon as he said that, he handed her the bouquet in his hand. Yun Shirshir held the bouquet shyly. The next second, Mu Yaja hugged her shoulders affectionately and kissed her delicate red lips tenderly. The guests below the stage were also touched and clapped their hands. Some were so touched that their eyes were wet. The most beautiful love might not be met in the most beautiful years, but it was the company of holding hands for the longest time. It was the most beautiful thing to have until the end. At this moment, Gong Jie quietly let go of his hand and stepped down from the stage. He stood by the side and quietly watched the tender scene on the stage, his gaze gradually deepened. At this moment he put aside all the feuds and resentment, and offered his most sincere blessings for the person he loved deep in his heart. Sister will be happy. As long as she could be happy, he would not regret his decision no matter what. After a short moment of tenderness, Lu Jinyu walked up to the stage and said mysteriously to the guests, "Let's invite our honorable little guest to perform a special performance for everyone." Xiao Yichen walked up to the stage and then walked to the center of the stage. He stood between Mu Yaja and Yun Shirshir and suddenly took out a small magic wand. "Next, I'm going to perform a magic trick for everyone." "What magic trick?" Lu Jinyu pretended to be mysterious. Xiao Yichen, however, learned from Yu Yu's arrogance and snorted coldly. "You'll know when I perform it." The guests roared with laughter. They all thought that this little guy, who was as serious as a little adult, was really too adorable. He was pretending to be mysterious. Chapter 1805. The little guy suddenly waved his hands in the air to the music in the hall. He closed his eyes and looked very stylish. He was imitating the world's top magician, as if he was going to perform a mysterious magic trick. However, after waving his hands for a long time, nothing happened. Mu Yaja had no idea that there would be such a trick during the ceremony. He looked confused. Yun Shirshir's eyes widened in curiosity as she waited to see what the little lad was up to. Yu, who was standing at the side, fell silent. What kind of clown was this guy trying to pull on stage? Lu Jinyu urged, "Did you conjure anything?" Seeing that nothing happened, Xiao Yichen got a little anxious. His face flushed red as he said, "Don't be anxious. I'm still brewing." As soon as he said that, the guests below the stage burst into laughter again. They were amused by the child's cuteness and playfulness. "This child is so adorable." Yu Yu raised his eyebrows. Playfulness? In his opinion, Mu Yichen was a clown. What kind of trick was he up to? Mu Yichen waved it around for a long time, but there was still no movement from it. The guests below the stage burst into laughter again. Mu Yichen suddenly felt uneasy and asked Lu Jinyu for help. "Uncle Jinyu, what's going on? This isn't how the script was written." However, his voice wasn't soft, and everyone below the stage heard him clearly. This time he was exposed. Yun Shirshir snorted and burst into laughter. Mu Yaja and Yu Yu held their foreheads in tacit understanding, clearly feeling helpless. However, Lu Jinyu said in all seriousness, "Have you forgotten the magic trick that I taught you yesterday?" "That's right. This is the trick." "Little fool, Uncle Jinyu will teach you again." As he spoke, Lu Jinyu squatted down and held his little hands. He slowly gestured in the air. Within a few seconds, a flock of snow-white pigeons suddenly flew over from not far away. They circled the ceiling of the venue before flapping their wings and flying away. Xiao Yichen's eyes lit up. This sudden and magical scene surprised all the guests present. However, what was even more surprising was that there was actually a nimble pigeon flying straight towards Mu Yichen. The little fellow immediately stretched out his hand, and the pigeon nimbly landed on his finger, standing steadily on his hand. Everyone looked over and saw that there was a rose in the pigeon's mouth. Under the rose's flower path, there were 2 exquisite and small boxes. Mu Yichen smiled and wanted to take the box from its little mouth. Unexpectedly, the pigeon had a little temper and turned its head away, refusing to give it to him. Mu Yichen panicked and reached out to grab it. Goo! He was pecked by the proud pigeon. Wah! Mu Yichen looked angry. This pigeon must have been transformed by Yu Yu. Yu Yu had been implicated even when he was lying down. Mu Yichen tried to take it again, but the pigeon pecked his little pink hand again. Mu Yichen looked aggrieved and pursed his lips unhappily. "Even a pigeon is bullying me?" Everyone was amused by the clown's antics. Even Xianxia couldn't be bothered to be reserved. She immediately broke into laughter. "Little fool," Yu muttered. She ran onto the stage and flicked Mu Yichen's little head. "How stupid! You can't even handle a little pigeon." Xiao Yichen felt even more aggrieved. Chapter 1806. Everyone was amused by the clown's antics. Even Xianxia could not be bothered to maintain her composure as she snickered to herself. "Little fool," Yu muttered as he ran to the stage and flicked Mu Yichen's head. "You're so stupid. You can't even handle a pigeon." Xiao Yichen felt even more aggrieved as he looked at him. He was so upset that he was about to cry. "Stupid Yu, why don't you do it if you can?" Yu snorted arrogantly, but he still reached out and gently patted the pigeon's head. His gentle touch quickly won the pigeon's trust. Yu smoothly took the box. Then he turned around and handed the 2 boxes containing the rings to Mu Yaja. Mu Yichen was dumbfounded, unable to believe what he had just seen. Yu seemed to have telepathy with the pigeon. That's not fair. It turned out that this was the sacred moment of exchanging rings, and they had purposely used the most innocent and unique way to present it to the public. Yun Qingmiao and Yun Qinli stood on their tiptoes to look at the stage, curious as to what was in the boxes. From the looks of it, they were probably exchanging engagement rings. Yu beamed. Yu and Xiao Yichen wish Daddy and Mommy a blissful marriage for 100 years. We hope that Daddy and Mommy will always love each other and grow old together. This is the gift we prepared for Daddy and Mommy on this important day. His sweet words instantly made the guests below the stage laugh. Some of the guests knew about Mu Yichen, but they knew very little about Yu. However, when they saw that Yu and Mu Yichen looked alike, they knew that this child was probably Mu Yichen's younger brother. It was probably because Mu Yaja was eager to protect his son that he did not expose him to the public too early. Yu had said that this was a secret gift for her parents, but it was not just for show. This pair of engagement rings were personally chosen by Yu and Mu Yichen. Of course, this pair of diamond rings was not cheap. However, this was a small token of appreciation from Yu and Xiao Yichen. Yun Shirshir did not know about this. However, Mu Yaja knew about it. Before the engagement ceremony, Yu had secretly found him and told him about it. It turned out that the 2 little guys wanted to use their private savings to personally choose a pair of engagement rings for them as a token of their sincerity. However, he couldn't let Yun Shirshir know about it. Mu Yaja, on the other hand, laughed. These 2 were so smart that they even knew to specially choose a gift for the engagement. However, he knew very well that although the 2 little guys were only 7 years old, they were millionaires and had a lot of private savings. He had a rough idea of Xiao Yichen's private savings. As for Yu, as a core member of Hurricane Group, it was natural that he had a lot of money in his hands. That was a very impressive amount of money. Even Mu Yaja did not have a direct understanding of his son's wealth. He only knew that Hurricane Group's financial strength was not inferior to Mu Corporation's. In fact, it might even be stronger than Mu Corporation's. Chapter 1807. When Xiao Yichen found out about this, he wanted to join in as well. He also took out his secret stash of money and said that he wanted to choose together with Yu. Hence, the 2 little rascals started to choose early on. Mu Yaja was a little surprised. Then he asked curiously about the design that the 2 little rascals had chosen. However, at this moment, the 2 little rascals acted mysteriously and said that they would give him a surprise on the day of the engagement ceremony. Mu Yaja took the box from him. The moment he opened the box, a dazzling light stole everyone's attention. Following the dazzling light, a pigeon's egg embedded with a pink diamond appeared in everyone's line of sight. It was a pair of engagement rings. On the female ring, there was a rose gold ring holder with a 2-carat pink diamond embedded in it. The unique design and exquisite craftsmanship made it look like a work of the gods. There were a total of 121 exquisite facets. The entire ring was so dazzling that one could feel its unique radiance even from a distance away. It was not to say that the bigger the diamond on the ring, the better it was. On this point, one could not help but praise Yu's taste. Although the diamond was only 2 carats, its purity, color, and craftsmanship were all top-notch. On the other hand, Mu Yaja's engagement ring was similarly luxurious but reserved. There were no unnecessary decorations or embellishments. It was also a rose gold ring, but the design was extremely novel. The diamond on the male ring was embedded on the reverse side. In the inner part of the ring holder, there was a 20-carat diamond. There was a special saying about this. It meant that the love for her was in the heart and wholeheartedly. Generally speaking, engagement rings were only prepared for the female party. However, Yu felt that since it was an engagement, both her daddy and mommy had to choose a ring. Hence, she chose a ring for Mu Yaja. Mu Yaja raised his eyebrows and suddenly smiled. It was obvious that the two little fellows must have spent a lot of effort to choose such a special gift. He smiled at Yu and Mu Yichen to express his gratitude. Then, with everyone watching, he lifted Xianxia's hand and slowly put the beautiful ring on her ring finger. At this point, it was like a silent and solemn declaration of his sovereignty. From now on, this woman would be his rightful fiancée. Under everyone's witness, Xianxia gently raised her hand. On her slender finger, there was a ring that was so beautiful that it could not be any more dazzling. She smiled and lifted Mu Yaja's hand. She took out the diamond ring and slowly put it on his ring finger. From this moment onwards, he was officially her fiancé. When Xianxia thought of this, countless complicated feelings welled up in her heart. In the end, there was only sweetness and gratitude. Kiss me, kiss me, kiss, kiss. The guests below the stage were infected by the sweet and warm atmosphere. They could not help but encourage and cheer loudly. Chapter 1808. Mu Yaja, on the other hand, generously hugged her waist and, under everyone's blessings, gently planted a passionate kiss on her delicate red lips. On the stage, as the two of them hugged and kissed, the applause below the stage also erupted without holding back. It was just a light kiss, but he knew when to stop. With that, the engagement ceremony was completed. Yu and Xiao Yichen walked down the stage. Mu Yichen looked back 3 times as he walked. Seeing his daddy and mommy blissful moment, he was so happy that he wanted to fly into the sky. However, as he was distracted, he bumped into someone with a plop. Mu Yichen lost his balance and was about to fall backward. However, the man reached out his hand and firmly supported him as he was about to kiss the ground. Thank you. Ha! Mu Yichen was about to turn back to express his gratitude when he looked up and saw Gong Jie, who was wearing a snow-white trench coat, looking down at him expressionlessly. Yu stood beside him and looked at him with disdain. What an idiot! How could you bump into someone when you're walking? I was just looking at Daddy and Mommy. All of a sudden, Gong Jie bent down on one knee with great interest and looked at him at eye level. His lips curled up slightly as a rare look of calmness appeared on his face. He was very tall as Mu Yaja. On top of that, he had the natural aura of a king. When he knelt down, it felt as though he was condescending. What's your name? Mu Yichen heard this and smiled confidently. He had inherited Mu Yaja's arrogant demeanor and was natural and unrestrained. My name is Mu Yichen. Do you know who I am? Gong Jie teased him. Mu Yichen tilted his head and smiled. I know. Oh. You're Mommy's younger brother, so I have to call you Uncle. With that, Mu Yichen placed his hands behind his back and called out obediently, Uncle. Gong Jie was amused by him. Good boy. Mu Yichen said, but I called you Uncle. Shouldn't you give me a big red packet? Gong Jie was stunned. He turned his head and exchanged glances with Yu. He furrowed his brows curiously. Is there such a thing? Yu fell silent and then said, Yes. Uncle, when in Rome, do as the Romans do and give him a big red packet. Gong Jie. After that, Mu Yaja and Xianxia walked off the stage and began to receive the guests' blessings. Soon, the gift that Jiang Xin had prepared was presented before everyone's eyes. It was a 9-tiered cake with 2 exquisite dolls made according to Xianxia and Mu Yaja's likeness. The entire cake was exquisitely made, with beautiful decorations and rich colors. One look at it and one couldn't help but drool. It was said that this cake was made by a famous chef and was flown over. Jiang Xin asked eagerly, Sister-in-law, do you like the gift I prepared? Xianxia smiled and nodded. I like it. Xianxia was instantly elated and his face glowed. Xianxia suddenly said softly, but it's not as thoughtful as Jinyu's. Xianxia, Lu Jinyu, who was standing at the side, was instantly satisfied. Xianxia was in tears. Sister-in-law, I'll give you a big red packet later too. Chapter 1809. Lu Jinyu patted him on the shoulder. See? Red packets may be tacky, but sister-in-law likes them. The rest of the group immediately agreed to prepare a big red packet, which tickled Xianxia to no end. The dishes were served one after another at the gala. The guests were holding plates in their hands as they chatted and toasted in front of the buffet table. Yun Qingmiao and Yun Qinli kept looking around in the crowd and finally spotted Gong Jie's back at a table. They exchanged glances, and Yun Qinli urged, "Sis, go and find out his name." "Why do you want me to find out?" "Because you're dressed up prettily today. Men naturally can't refuse a beautiful woman." Yun Qinli's words were clear and logical. Yun Qingmiao, on the other hand, was secretly delighted. She subconsciously tidied her hair and looked at herself in the mirror before finally walking toward Gong Jie. Gong Jie held his plate and looked at the dazzling array of dishes, but his gaze eventually landed on the dessert section. Like Yun Shirshir, he had a sweet taste and especially loved desserts. Therefore, desserts were irresistible to him. Gong Jie had just reached out his hand when a woman's hand suddenly reached out from his right and touched it. His sensitivity jolted and he quickly retracted his hand, frowning in displeasure. He had an extremely serious mysophobia and usually did not allow anyone to touch him. Even if he did, he would wear gloves in advance. He did not like anyone to touch him, except for the people close to him. Thus, while feeling displeased, Gong Jie could not help but look to his side. He saw Yun Qingmiao standing at the side with a red face and looking at him awkwardly. She appeared to be at a loss and looked apologetic. "Sir, I didn't do it on purpose." Gong Jie's face was cold as he scrutinized her from head to toe. His frosty gaze made Yun Qingmiao look even more innocent. "I just wanted to try this dessert too." She forced a smile and gave a seemingly reasonable explanation. Unfortunately, unlike other men, Gong Jie's eyes were sharp enough to tell at a glance that this woman was deliberately trying to get close to him, which was why she had played such a small trick. Alas, this method of hitting on him was too boring. He had seen enough. Gong Jie had no lack of women around him. With his handsome appearance and domineering aura, as one of the heirs of the Gong family, his power was shocking. The women around him were like a river, flocking to him like a flock of ducks. There were even some who used unscrupulous means to get close to him and attract him. However, he was used to ignoring women. Unless there was a biological need, women were dispensable to him. He didn't need love. Therefore, he would definitely keep a distance from women unless he had a great need for them. Yun Qingmiao felt embarrassed as she looked at his cold face. This man seemed to be very difficult to approach. He looked noble and arrogant. His face was indifferent, and his eyes were especially cold and sharp like icicles that could pierce one's skin. Gong Jie turned around expressionlessly. Clearly, he had no intention of paying attention to her. Yun Qingmiao was naturally indignant about being splashed with cold water in front of everyone. Thus, she bit her lip, stepped forward, and gently tugged at his sleeve. Chapter 1810. Gong Jie turned around, raised his hand, and splashed the red wine all over her face. Voila! Yun Qingmiao came back to her senses with the sudden noise, only to realize what the man had done to her. He had splashed red wine all over her face. Drops of red wine slid down her cheeks and eventually drenched her hair and dress. She looked extremely disheveled under everyone's watchful eyes. Gong Jie's cold gaze fell on her. His deep voice was as cold as ice, and his face was expressionless. "Don't touch me with your filthy hands, okay?" Yun Qingmiao opened her mouth to speak, but when she looked at his cold face, she felt a wave of sadness and even more humiliated. "I don't mean anything else. It's just that," Gong Jie impatiently interrupted her explanation. "I don't mean anything else. I just find you annoying, so stay away from me." She was so embarrassed that she froze on the spot. Her feet seemed to be nailed to the ground, and she could not take a step forward. The guests looked in her direction, and for a moment, she was standing in the middle of the discussion. Xianxia heard the strange commotion and rushed over with her dress in hand. However, she was stunned when she saw the scene. Xianxia, what's going on? Xianxia saw her, and the coldness on his face was immediately replaced by a gentle expression. Sis. Xianxia, what's wrong with her? Xianxia glanced at Yun Qingmiao, who was surrounded by the crowd, and then at the mess she was in. She could not understand what had happened. It's nothing. It's just that she touched me with her filthy hands just now. It's really annoying. Xianxia's voice turned cold as he said, if it weren't for Sis's important day today, she can forget about keeping that hand of hers. His voice was not loud, but it reached Yun Qingmiao's ears clearly. She could not help but shudder at such a cold and frightening statement. It was so cold that it penetrated her heart. These words were not false at all. In the past, at a private party, a woman had tampered with his wine glass in order to get Xianxia. When the Xianxia found out, one of her hands was crippled on the spot. Perhaps, on the surface, this man was so docile and well-behaved. This tenderness was only limited to Xianxia. Other than her, the Xianxia treated women rather coldly. This was something Yun Qingmiao had learned firsthand. For a moment, she was embarrassed and aggrieved. She covered her face awkwardly, lifted her messy dress, and hurriedly left. Xianxia furrowed her brows, not knowing what to say. Xianxia saw her eyebrows tightly knitted, suddenly a little nervous. Sister, are you angry with me? How could this be? You don't look well. I'm not angry. Xianxia smiled helplessly. But Xianxia, there are some people that you don't have to care about. Xianxia said guiltily, I'm sorry. I'll restrain myself next time. Xianxia smiled. All right, good boy. She gently stroked Xianxia's head, her eyes full of indulgence. Yun Qingmiao returned to her room, and Yun Qinli arrived shortly after, only to see her sister huddled in a corner and crying silently. Sis, are you crying? Chapter 1811. Breaking down, Yun Qingmiao interrupted her and questioned, You're not the one who embarrassed yourself in front of so many guests. Why are you making sarcastic remarks here? Yun Qinli was speechless. Yun Qingmiao was crying so hard that her eyes were red and swollen. The thought of being splashed with wine and humiliated in front of so many people just now filled her with resentment and nowhere to vent. Hence, she did not hold back in her tone toward her older sister. Yun Qinli, however, snapped, I'm not the one who splashed red wine on your face. Do you have to be so angry at me? Yun Qingmiao snorted but did not say anything. She just kept sobbing, clearly feeling aggrieved. Yun Qinli walked to her side, squatted down, and suddenly whispered, I heard that man call Xianxia sister earlier. Could they be long-lost siblings? Sister? Yun Qingmiao looked up with reddened eyes in suspicion. He should be Xianxia's younger brother. Judging from their appearances, the two of them do look very similar. Why? Yun Qingmiao broke down and wailed. Why does Xianxia have so much? She has such a handsome fiancé who is so powerful that he even booked an entire island for her engagement party. Not only that, do you see the accessories she's wearing? Do you see that pair of engagement rings? Do you see that priceless gown she's wearing? Why? Why does she deserve to be doted on like a princess? Yun Qinli frowned and suddenly said, I asked around earlier. This private island isn't booked. Then what is it? This is one of the private properties under Xianxia's fiancé's name. In other words, this island has long been under his name. Yun Qingmiao's eyes widened and she was speechless. Sister, have you heard of Dishing Financial Group? Yun Qingmiao shook her head, baffled by the situation. Never heard of it. What happened? I did some research. If I'm not wrong, Xianxia's fiancé is the CEO of Dishing Financial Group. Yun Qinli's eyes were filled with jealousy and envy. So what? Yun Qingmiao, on the other hand, knew very little about Dishing Financial Group, so she did not take her words to heart when she heard them. Yun Qinli raised her eyebrows and looked at her in disbelief. So what? Sister, do you know the status of Dishing Financial Group in the country? Do you know how much Xiaxia's fiancé is worth? Do you know what it means to be the president of Dishing Financial Group? If Xiaxia's fiancé is the rumored mysterious young master of Dishing Financial Group, then it can be said that if Xiaxia marries this man, she will undoubtedly become a phoenix and enjoy a lifetime of glory. Is it that exaggerated? Don't you know how many real estate companies Dishing Financial Group owns? Whether it's finance, real estate, entertainment, vacations, star-rated hotel chains, medical care. Dishing's Polar Light Group has a lot of investments in every field. It can be said that with this identity alone, Yun Xiaxia's life, she'll really become a phoenix. As Yun Qinli spoke, her eyes were filled with undisguised jealousy and hatred. Chapter 1812. After marrying him, she would not have to worry about her life's glory and wealth. Among the guests earlier, even the royals and political leaders of other countries, as well as the honorable president, were present. It went without saying how outstanding Mu Yaja's status was. Yun Qinli was extremely envious. However, she could only look on helplessly. In her heart, however, she started to hate Yun Xiaxia for being such a jinx. In her opinion, a woman with such a background like Yun Xiaxia was nothing more than a typical Cinderella. Apart from her pretty face, what else did she have? How could she be worthy of Mu Yaja, who was of such a high status? To her, someone like Yun Xiaxia, who could marry a rich young master with a net worth of tens of millions, was already very enviable. Now, especially after experiencing such a grand and romantic engagement ceremony, her jealousy toward Yun Xiaxia had seeped into her bones. What right did she have? What right did Yun Xiaxia have to marry such an outstanding man when she had nothing? How many people were envious of her for marrying into a rich family? What about her? Comparing oneself to others was truly infuriating. Yun Qingmiao was also feeling conflicted. After witnessing the materialistic nature of the big city, she yearned for a life of luxury. Her mood also became impetuous. She desperately wanted to integrate into the upper-class society and befriend an outstanding man like Mu Yaja. She did not have high expectations. As long as it was a man half as capable as Mu Yaja, she would go after him. Alas, she was met with a rebuff from the Gongjia. Yun Qingmiao felt unbalanced. What right did Yun Xiaxia have but not her? She did not know what tricks she had used to make a man like Mu Yaja fall head over heels for her. It seemed that she was quite capable. On the surface, she looked pure and untainted, as pure as ice and as pure as jade. Who knew how despicable she was in her bones? She's really the reincarnation of a vixen. I don't know what kind of despicable method she used, but look at Mu Yaja, he's so obedient to her. Sis, let's work harder too. Who knows, maybe we can find a man who's more outstanding than him. Yun Qinli encouraged. Yun Qingmiao narrowed her eyes. Although she sneered without saying a word, the ambition in her eyes could not be concealed. After the engagement ceremony ended, Yun Xiaxia and Mu Yaja sent off the guests. Not long after, another uninvited guest arrived. When Mu Linfeng and Mu Shumin appeared at the venue, Yun Xiaxia was caught off guard and stood rooted to the ground. Mu Yaja was not too surprised, however. He knew that this man would eventually show up. With Mu Shumin's help, Mu Linfeng leaned on his cane and looked at the newlyweds with a dark expression. When he saw Mu Yaja hugging Yun Xiaxia's shoulder, he sized her up with a cold gaze and let out a bone-chilling sneer. The venue was completely sealed off today. Those who could not produce an invitation were not allowed to enter. When Mu Linfeng and Mu Shumin arrived, they were stopped outside the venue because they could not produce an invitation. It was only when the guests had left that he was able to sneak in. Mu Linfeng did not know that Mu Yaja had prepared this engagement ceremony at first. He thought back to when Mu Yaja had said that even if he got married, he would not touch the Mu family's assets, but he did not believe it. Chapter 1813. In the end, when he found out that Mu Yaja had meticulously prepared such a grand engagement party, he was shocked. He knew that it was because of this engagement banquet. Although it was not a high-profile event, many important guests were invited. The sound of the wind naturally fell into his ears. How could he believe it? Engagement party? This rascal did not use any funds from the Mu group. How did he have the ability to organize such a grand engagement party? He was full of doubts as he rushed to the venue with Mu Shumin. However, the scene before him made him turn pale with fright. Without using the Mu group's funds, the engagement party was actually so grand and dignified. At the same time, this surprised him and vaguely made him suspicious. When he wanted to enter the venue, he was stopped at the door. This infuriated Mu Linfeng greatly. Who was he? He was Mu Yaja's second uncle. Why did he need an invitation to attend his nephew's engagement party? How could this be? Mu Linfeng felt like he was going crazy. If it were not for the 2 holes in his nose, he would have been angered to death. He was filled with hatred. Mu Shumin was also rebuffed. She rushed all the way here but was stopped at the door. She had lost all her face. Hence, when she saw Mu Yaja and Yun Shishir smiling as they sent the guests off, she suppressed her anger with great difficulty and did not explode on the spot. When Mu Yaja saw them, he still gave them some face and called out coldly, "Second uncle." However, he ignored Mu Shumin as if she was invisible. Mu Shumin was so angry that she almost vomited blood. Just as she was about to flare up, Mu Linfeng held her down. Only then did she swallow her anger and calm down. "You still have the cheek to call me second uncle?" Most of the guests had left, so Mu Linfeng stood at the door and knocked his walking stick on the floor. He said angrily, "What do you mean by this? What are you trying to do by coming to this island without telling everyone in the Mu family? Are you trying to rebel? Or will you only stop when you anger me to death?" "Second uncle, you're exaggerating." Mu Yaja hugged Yun Shishir tightly, but his expression was indifferent. "Shishir and I should invite guests who sincerely wish us well for our engagement party. As for those who treat us coldly and have bad intentions, there is no need to invite them." "Bad intentions?" Mu Linfeng frowned deeply, but he was so angry that he laughed. "Rascal, are you trying to anger me to death? Didn't I warn you not to have anything to do with this woman? The sooner you cut off the relationship between you and her, the better. I don't approve of her, so naturally, I won't allow her to take half a step into the Mu family. I've told you this clearly, but you didn't listen, did you?" Gong Jie heard the commotion and walked to the door. However, when he saw this scene, a cold light flashed in his deep eyes. A cold arc appeared on his lips. He walked to Yun Shishir expressionlessly, but his exceptionally cold gaze landed on Mu Linfeng. Mu Linfeng was so angry that he did not notice that the indifferent man standing behind Yun Shishir had completely exploded in anger. "I heard about your engagement from someone else. You hid it from everyone in the Mu family and actually came here to get engaged with this unknown woman. I think you're going to ruin the Mu family's reputation." "Shut up! Shut up!" Chapter 1814. Gong Jie and Mu Yaja spoke in unison, almost at the same time. As soon as he said that, the 2 men exchanged glances. Gong Jie's eyes, however, were filled with inexplicable hostility. He instinctively pulled Yun Shishir aside and looked at Mu Yaja unhappily. His eyes were burning with anger as he pointed at Mu Linfeng and Mu Shumin. What's going on? He had thought that this engagement ceremony would receive everyone's blessings. However, these 2 people had suddenly jumped out to criticize him. Gong Jie sized up the middle-aged man and woman standing in front of him. Based on their words, he could tell who they were. They should be from the Mu family. However, they had been so aggressive from the moment they appeared. They even insulted his sister and called her a wild woman. These words fell clearly into his ears. What wild woman? When Gong Jie heard this, he was filled with anger but had nowhere to vent it. He held her hand tightly, and every joint in his body stiffened. Yun Shishir was shocked by Gong Jie's anger. She could not help but reach out to comfort Gong Jie's shoulder. However, she saw him glaring at Mu Yaja and questioning sternly, "How dare they call my sister a wild woman? Who gave them the guts?" Mu Linfeng was inexplicably furious when he heard this. Where did this arrogant brat come from? How dare he say such things? What did he mean by, "Who gave them the guts"? This man's tone was so arrogant. Did he know who he was shouting at? If he knew, he would probably feel the greatest remorse. It seemed that this brat was a typical example of a young and impetuous man. He probably did not know who he was offending. Mu Linfeng was so angry that he could not speak. Mu Shumin stood at the side and mocked, "Who is this arrogant brat?" Looking at his face, he seems to be this wild woman's biological brother. The sister is shameless and wants to climb up the social ladder. As the brother, he should be shameless and want to use his sister's relationship with the Mu family to climb up the social ladder. "Shut up." Mu Yaja's eyes darkened as he reprimanded Mu Shumin. Mu Shumin was so angry that he frowned, and his face twitched. "Yaja, who are you asking to shut up?" "I asked you to shut up." Mu Yaja was fuming. He stared at Gong Jie holding Xianxia's waist and said coldly, "Let her go. She's my sister. Of course, I have to protect her. In the past, she was bullied because I wasn't around. Now, I won't let anyone humiliate her." As he spoke, he did not let go of her hand. He suddenly regretted it. This was only an engagement, and he had to watch as his sister was humiliated. Looking at the situation, it wasn't the first time this had happened. Gong Jie did not dare to imagine how much his sister had suffered when he was not around. What did this mean? This meant that this man could not protect his sister at all. This meant that he did not have the ability to do so. How could he be assured to hand his sister over to this man? He did not even have a reason to convince himself. At the thought of this, Gong Jie shielded Xianxia behind him even more. His protective stance agitated Mu Yaja even more. Chapter 18:15. She's not only your fiancée, but she's also my sister. She's my most important family member. Don't forget that I warned you before that if you let my sister suffer even the slightest grievance, I'll flatten the Mu group overnight. The anger that the two men had been suppressing was now unleashed without any restraint. For a moment, the two of them faced each other. Sparks flew, and the surrounding atmosphere turned cold in an instant. Gong Jie curled his lips and tightened his grip on Xianxia's hand. With a look of disdain, he said, "Moreover, it's just an engagement. She's not officially your wife yet." Xianxia glanced at Gong Jie and then at Mu Yaja. She bit her lip in annoyance and opened her mouth to say something, but Gong Jie said in a low voice, "Sister, don't say anything." "Shao Jie, shu." Gong Jie put a finger on her lips, indicating for her to keep quiet. "I'm sorry, sister. I can control my temper in any matter, but not in this matter." "Shao Jie, listen. Just based on the fact that the Mu family called her a wild woman of unknown origin, I can't sit back and do nothing." With that, Gong Jie looked coldly at Mu Linfeng, but his gaze was full of hostility. Mu Linfeng, on the other hand, was taken aback by his insolent words. "Flatten the Mu group overnight?" Mu Shumin repeated, but she felt that it was very funny. She suddenly let out a cold snort. "You brat, not only do you have a big temper, your tone is also not small. I don't know what you're going to do to flatten the Mu group." Mu Linfeng was stunned and kept quiet. Why did he have a feeling that this man wasn't just spouting nonsense? He glanced at Gong Jie and gradually felt that although this young and arrogant man had an extraordinary aura, he was not a simple person. That was because he saw Gong Jie's eyes. Those were the arrogant eyes of a king. They were insufferably arrogant and unruly. It was as if he could trample the whole world under his feet if he wanted to. Gong Jie sneered and mocked. "Remember, my sister is nobler than you. You're not worthy of my sister." Mu Shumin's eyes were filled with anger, but they were full of mockery. "Not worthy of her? Who do you think your sister is? She's just a lowly commoner. Do you think that you can climb up the ranks and enjoy all the glory and wealth just because you're related to the Mu group? I think you're dreaming." Mu Yaja coldly replied, "Shut up. You have no right to speak here." Scram. Mu Shumin looked at him in disbelief and said, "What did you say? You're asking me to?" "Mu Yaja, I think you've lost your mind, haven't you? This woman is really scheming. I don't know what kind of bewitching potion she used to make you so infatuated with her. How can you side with an outsider? I'm your aunt, but what about you?" He actually dared to say such disgraceful words? "How dare you speak rudely to me for an outsider with ulterior motives? How presumptuous!" Wuxia said coldly, "Who's the one speaking rudely?" "Xianxia is my fiancée. In the future, she'll be my only wife. Show some respect." Chapter 1816. Who else could it be? Mu Shumin sneered, but every word of hers was laced with poison. "Tell your sister, don't be delusional. Don't think that just because she's sucked up to the Mu family, she can really become a phoenix." Xianxia clenched her fists, so angry that she was at a loss for words. Gongjie's heart ached as he hugged her tightly. He was so angry that his face turned cold. He looked up, and his eyes were sharp as he said word by word, "He ba. Make her shut up." A fully armed man behind him took a step forward and slowly closed in on Mu Shumin. Mu Shumin looked at the man who was closing in on her. Seeing that he was fully armed, she inexplicably panicked. "What are you doing?" Just as she finished speaking, she felt a black shadow flash in front of her. When she suddenly reacted, that man had flashed behind her like a ghost. His large palm grabbed her chin and forcefully twisted, only to hear a very heavy sound. With a kacha sound, her chin was instantly dislocated. The immense pain made Mu Shumin break out in cold sweat. She held her injured chin and stammered, but because of her dislocated chin, she couldn't utter a coherent sentence. The man waved his hand again, and a fiery hot slap landed on her face. Instantly, she couldn't find her bearings. Mu Shumin was also someone who had served in the army for 3 years. She had trained her skills beyond that of an ordinary person. Even so, to her, this man's fighting ability was quite terrifying. She didn't even see how the man made his move. She felt the world spinning around her, and the next second, she was pathetically placed on the ground. This slap almost perforated her eardrums, and there was a loud buzzing sound in her ears, causing her to see black and white in front of her eyes. Even her brain was a little dazed. Xianxia was tongue-tied at this sight. She then turned to look at Gongjie in shock. Wuxia's expression changed, but he didn't say a word. In fact, even if Gongjie didn't do it, he would have done it. This Mu Shumin was really too presumptuous. When Mu Linfeng saw this, he was inexplicably shocked and furious. "Stop! Tiba! Continue to hit her." Gongjie, who was holding Xianxia in his arms, casually said this. Mu Linfeng was about to stop him, but the man pushed him aside. Mu Shumin was in so much pain that she was in tears. However, in the next second she felt her collar was pulled up again. Then, she was ruthlessly slapped, one after another, until she didn't even have the chance to cry out in pain. It was a horrible scene. Although it was a manzazazas, it was a mercenary. But for mercenaries, there was no such thing. He only obeyed the orders of his employer. Whatever the employer asked him to do, he would do it without hesitation. His execution was top-notch. Mu Linfeng stood at the side, looking anxious and angry. He looked at Wuxia, who was watching indifferently from the start, with a hateful expression. "You're just going to watch your aunt be humiliated, aren't you?" Mu Linfeng glared at him fiercely, his voice trembling badly. Wuxia sneered. Only in this aspect, he and Gongjie were on the same side. "Second uncle, you're wrong. Aunt's mouth really needs to be disciplined. Since that's the case, why don't we discipline her properly? Otherwise, he really doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth." Chapter 1817. Therefore, since someone was willing to help him, why wouldn't he do it? As a nephew, he could not be rude to his aunt, or he would be offending his superior. However, if Gongjie were to step in, it would be considered as helping Xianxia vent her anger. Even if Gongjie did not step in this time, Wuxia would still secretly teach Mu Shumin a lesson. "Stop! Stop hitting him!" Mu Linfeng stomped his feet in anger. Gongjie remained expressionless as he held Xiaxia's shoulders and looked coldly at Mu Shumin, who was being punched and kicked on the ground, without any intention of backing down. It was as if this was the only way to appease his unhappiness. Herba was one of the top experts by Gongjie's side. As a veteran mercenary of Mercenary Paradise, he had a lot of experience. After 10 years of war, his body was practically made of steel. Even the blood flowing in his body was like a strong liquid made of molten iron. Don't be fooled by the fact that he didn't use much strength in that punch. Even so, with just a few slaps, she would definitely fall apart. Mu Shumin was beaten black and blue, but even so, Gong Jie had no intention of retracting his order. He had decided to beat this woman, who had offended his sister, to death. In front of Xianxia, he might be obedient and docile like a sheep without any temper, but other than that, in the eyes of his subordinates, Gong Jie was a rather vicious and merciless person. How vicious and merciless was he? It could be said that he was an extremely vicious person despite his young age. Anyone who angered him would end up in an especially tragic state. Xianxia's heart skipped a beat as she watched. Even though she detested this woman for speaking without restraint, Gong Jie's subordinates were still too ruthless in their actions. She could not bear to watch any longer. This was definitely not a joke. If this went on, one could imagine that even if she did not lose half her life, she would have a few broken ribs. But the current atmosphere was too strange. While Mu Yaja remained unmoved, Gong Jie's face remained impassive. In fact, his lips even curled into a sinister smile. Thus, she said fearfully, "Shao Jie, stop hitting me. If this goes on, she'll lose her life." "Sis, you don't have to speak for her. Have you forgotten what she said about you?" Gong Jie said expressionlessly, "How dare this woman humiliate you? I will never forgive her." Mu Linfeng retorted furiously, "How arrogant of you! Do you know who we are? How dare you touch the Mu family? Do you know what kind of disgraceful thing you're doing? If you continue beating him like this, you'll beat him to death. How dare you?" Gong Jie glanced coldly at Mu Linfeng and said nonchalantly, "I want her life. You dare to bully my sister? You deserve to die. Otherwise, do you think that the Gong family can be bullied by any Tom, Dick, or Harry? The Mu family? Who do you think you are? Do you think that the Mu family can do whatever you want and bully others? I'd like to see if the Mu family or the Gong family is more capable." Mu Linfeng was stunned and looked at him in disbelief. The Gong family? What did this man just say? The Gong family? Could he be from the Gong family? Chapter 1818. The only thing she was concerned about now was that Mu Shumin was about to lose her life. Even though she hated her, today was the happiest day of her life. She did not want to cause any bloodshed because of one person. She would not feel good if they parted on bad terms because of this. Hence, she said in a pleading tone, "Shao Jie, listen to me, okay? At least not here. Today is my engagement day. Don't make such a big fuss. Don't overdo it, okay?" When Gong Jie heard this, he frowned but did not object forcefully. He took a deep breath and opened his eyes abruptly. With a sharp gaze, he said, "Stop." Almost at the same time he finished speaking, Herba stopped and retreated behind him, ready to receive orders at any time. "You're too heavy-handed. What if you kill her?" Gong Jie reprimanded impatiently. Heba looked confused. Didn't he ask him to be heavy-handed? "Today is my sister's important day. How unlucky would it be if I kill her and get covered in blood?" Gong Jie reprimanded again. Whatever Xianxia said, it was the truth. According to his original intention, a woman like her should be killed as soon as possible. However, his sister said that he could not kill anyone on such an important day. He immediately changed his stance and stood on the same side as Xianxia. The corners of Mu Yaja's eyes twitched fiercely. This Gong Jie was really not an ordinary person. In front of his subordinates and Xianxia, he was Satan on one side and an angel on the other. Earlier, he had viciously said that he wanted Mu Shumin's life. Once Xianxia spoke, he immediately flapped his wings like an adorable little angel and flew around Xianxia. Mu Linfeng walked to Mu Shumin only to see her lying face down on the ground, unconscious. When he turned her over with difficulty, he saw that her eyes were rolled back, her face was covered in blood, and her entire body was limp. Especially her two arms, they were curled up at an extremely twisted angle, as if they had been severely fractured, twisted into a terrifying angle. It was a tragic sight. It was already not easy to keep her life. Mu Linfeng's mind was in a mess. Hence, he did not care much and hurriedly called for people to carry Mu Shumin to the island's infirmary. As he escorted Mu Shumin away, he glared fiercely at Gong Jie with a hostile look. His heart was full of vigilance. This man was simply a terrifying existence. Mu Linfeng snorted coldly and left in a hurry. Mu Yaja expressionlessly ordered people to clean the mess on the ground. Gong Jie was unhappy to see Mu Shumin's infirmary. Hence, he comforted Yun Shirshir. Sister, don't spoil the fun because of her. She bullied you, and I've already ruthlessly retaliated. With today's lesson, she definitely won't let you suffer in the future. Shao Jie, don't you think you've gone overboard? Yun Shirshir interrupted him. Gong Jie was stunned and looked at her with a hurt expression. How have I gone overboard? When did you become so violent? Yun Shirshir looked at him sadly. She felt that she had inadvertently caught a glimpse of the terrifying and cold expression on his face just now. Somehow, she felt that this younger brother in front of her seemed a little unfamiliar. Gong Jie's gaze was stunned and he was full of grievances. Sister, how can you say that? How am I violent? Chapter 18-19. You're still saying that you're not violent after beating her up like that? But she bullied you. I'm standing up for you. I don't need you to stand up for me. Yun Shirshir said angrily, I don't like such a violent Shao Jie. You couldn't even bear to hurt a stray cat in the past, but now you can actually say something as scary as I just want her life. You weren't like this in the past. She didn't think that it was wrong for Gong Jie to stand up for her. However, she felt that Gong Jie had a scary side to him that she didn't know about. In her memory, her Shao Jie wasn't such a ruthless person. Perhaps it was because of some kind of telepathy. She felt that Shao Jie was a little different from the child who always stuck behind her when he was young. Back then, Shao Jie was innocent, cute, and innocent. Sometimes he was mischievous, sometimes he was docile, but at least he was kind. However, the Gong Jie of today, although he was as docile as a lamb in front of her, she realized how scary he was when he accidentally revealed his disguise in front of her. She wasn't a ruthless person. Mu Shumin did go overboard just now, but Shao Jie actually said that he just wanted her life. How could he say such cruel words so easily? Yun Shirshir couldn't help but suspect his identity. She suddenly asked suspiciously, Shao Jie, what do you do for a living? Can you tell me? Why do you have such a powerful personal bodyguard? Why are you always so busy, flying all over the world? Why have you become so ruthless, so arrogant that you don't put anyone in your eyes? What is your identity? I have a feeling that you're hiding something from me. Is that so? Gong Jie was stunned. He wanted to say something but stopped himself. He didn't dare to say it. He was afraid that if he told the truth, his sister would be afraid of him and distance herself from him. Yun Shirshir saw his evasive gaze and was disappointed. You don't want to be honest with me, do you? Gong Jie said hesitantly, Sis, don't tell me, sis, don't let your imagination run wild. Gong Jie was a little flustered as he comforted her. Don't let your imagination run wild, okay? I didn't mean to hide it from you, it's just what? Yun Shirshir narrowed her eyes. Shao Jie, I know I shouldn't interfere with your personal life, but there are some things that I really don't understand. I have a feeling that you and I are different. I'm like a commoner, but you give people the feeling that you're the supreme ruler who controls life and death. When she stood beside him, she would often feel suffocated by his domineering aura. Gong Jie remained silent, unsure of how to come clean with her. She smiled helplessly and casually said, Since you're willing to be honest and want to hide it from me, then continue hiding it from me. After saying that, she suddenly let go of his hand. Feeling nervous, the man reached out to grab her hand. But she coldly avoided him. Gong Jie looked at her with hurt, but he could only watch helplessly as she held onto Mu Yaja's arm and slowly walked away. Mu Yaja looked at him coldly and then, as if to provoke him, slowly walked away with a playful smile. Gong Jie was so angry that he clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. Do you think I should be honest with her about my identity? Chapter 18-20. Yu rolled his eyes. He took a sip of his cola and suddenly leaned forward mysteriously. He lowered his voice and said, Do you know why I hid the fact that I'm in the hurricane group from Mommy? Gong Jie asked, puzzled. Yu sniffled and said pitifully, if Mommy found out that I was involved in smuggling, she would beat my ass. He sighed and shook his head. That's why I tried so hard to hide it until now. Even Mommy doesn't know my identity. In Mommy's eyes, I'm an innocent and cute child. So, I'll play this role well. If she finds out that I've been doing these things behind her back, I'll definitely be beaten up badly. Gong Jie was utterly impressed. You were able to hide it from her for so long without being found out. That's because I'm good at acting. Yu was quite proud. Gong Jie was silent. He drank the dry red wine in his glass and said dejectedly, she said that I've changed. She said that I've become more ruthless. Yu, is that true? Yu sipped on his cola and gave him a look, telling him to figure it out for himself. Gong Jie frowned. What do you mean by that look? I think Mommy's right. Uncle, you're really ruthless. Yu spread his hands and pretended to be innocent. How am I ruthless? Yu rolled his eyes and said, hanging a pirate on a cargo ship under the scorching sun for 3 days and drying him alive. Only my dear uncle would do such a heartless thing. Gong Jie was silent again. He hijacked my cargo ship and shot one of my crew members. Leaving him under the scorching sun for 3 days is considered a light punishment. Then using a live hostage as a gun to practice shooting, only you would do that, right? Yu asked again. Gong Jie defended himself. That hostage was the leader of a terrorist organization and wanted to assassinate me. Yu was speechless. Gong Jie felt good about himself and said, actually, I feel that I'm very kind. Yu looked at him as if he was looking at a hopeless idiot. Uncle, I think your worldview might be a little different from Mommy's. Why? Yu, seriously. Look, in Mommy's worldview, killing, arson, smuggling, armed, these people are defined as bad people. Gong Jie nodded thoughtfully. But there are so many options. How many of them do you have? Have you killed anyone? Yes. Have you set fires? I bombed the presidents. Do you smuggle? Do you have an armed group? Yu shrugged helplessly and then laughed. In Mommy's heart, you're a heinous villain. Gong Jie was instantly disheartened and felt that there was nothing left to live for. Also, Mommy might be angry because she feels that you're hiding something from her. She actually cares about you a lot and wants to integrate into your world, but you seem to be deliberately hiding things from her, making her feel lonely. After all, Mommy's heart is more sensitive and fragile. Then what should I do? Should I tell her everything? Yu said, then let her know that you've killed people, set fires, and committed all kinds of crimes. Gong Jie was speechless. He couldn't tell her the truth. Chapter 1821. If you tell Mommy the truth, she will be frightened. If she finds out that the brother she has been taking care of since young is such a scary person. Yu was gloating over his brother's misfortune. Then help me think of a solution and tell me how to deal with this. Gong Jie ordered. Little Munchkin said proudly, I won't do it. Do as you see fit. You have to deal with your own problems. Don't push it to others. With that, he stood up and was about to leave. Gong Jie, who was behind him, suddenly flashed an evil smile. You want to leave? Sure. My dear little nephew, I don't mind dragging you down with me. When the time comes, I'll tell your mommy that you're in the same organization as me, and you've also killed people, set fires, and even hacked into the Pentagon's defense network to smuggle firearms. Guess what her expression will be like? Yu paused and turned around, giving Gong Jie a murderous look. How dare you? Do you think I won't? Gong Jie was not afraid of the threat in his eyes. Yu clenched his fists. He could not understand Gong Jie's thoughts and did not know if he would betray him. Hence, he took a deep breath and walked back to the table, forcing himself to sit down in front of him. Gong Jie poured him half a glass of Coke gently and pushed it in front of him. If I have to think of a solution, why don't we not deal with it? What? Deal with it coldly. Don't mention this matter. When this is over, make up an identity for her. Mommy will believe you. Gong Jie was speechless. So simple? What else can we do? Mommy can be smart sometimes, but most of the time, she is very stupid. Gong Jie nodded thoughtfully and suddenly looked at Yu Yu with a deep gaze. Yu Yu. Yes. Can I ask you a question? What is it? Gong Jie suddenly approached him, stared into his eyes, and asked in a deep voice, Are you willing to go to the headquarters with me? My father wants to see you. Yu Yu's expression froze as his eyes widened in astonishment. Your father wants to see me? According to his position, he is your superior. According to seniority, you should call him grandfather. Yu Yu frowned but did not say a word. Suddenly, he asked curiously, Why does he want to see me? As the #1 genius of the Hurricane Group and one of the developers of the Heavenly Eye, I'm naturally curious about your true face. He has already mentioned this to me for a long time, but he always considered that you might not be willing, so he never put it on the agenda. It just so happens that he wants to ask for your opinion. Yu Yu fell silent again. Gong Jie asked, Why? You don't want to? Yu Yu shook his head and said truthfully, Before I knew he was my grandfather, I had always wanted to see him. In my heart, he is a very powerful paragon. He was able to develop the Hurricane Group into such a magnificent territory. He is a genius leader and the person I admire the most. After a pause, he suddenly laughed and said, But after knowing he is my grandfather, I am not so impulsive about wanting to see him. Yu Yu said truthfully, Because I don't know what identity I should use to see him. Gong Jie was speechless. Chapter 1822. Unless Mommy is willing to return to the Gong family. If that's the case, then I will be willing to see him. Gong Jie slowly poured himself a glass of red wine. His slender fingers gently caressed the rim of the glass as if deep in thought. Yu Yu pursed his lips and smiled helplessly. No matter what, he would always be on the same side as Mommy. If he did not care about Mommy and returned to the Gong family with Gong Jie, then Gong Jie's father would be able to recognize him at first glance based on his facial features. When that time came, he would find out that it was Mommy. If it caused Mommy trouble, that would not be something he wanted to see. Gong Jie sized him up and suddenly remembered that Yun Shishir was unwilling to return to the Gong family because of Mu Yaja. He felt wronged. He asked, Yu Yu, why do you think a woman can sacrifice everything for love? Yu Yu was stunned. The corners of his eyes twitched violently as he silently complained, Uncle, I'm your nephew, not an encyclopedia. You don't have to ask me everything, do you? Because Uncle feels that my little nephew knows everything from heaven to earth. Since you're so smart, you'll definitely be able to give me an answer. Gong Jie lazily rested his chin on his hand and looked at him silently. Yu Yu was silent. Then, he calmly stirred the cola in his glass. He bit the straw and blew on it until it bubbled. He took a sip and said vaguely, Because we have different views on love. Love, to a man, may only be a part of a man. But to a woman, it may be her everything. When Gong Jie heard this, he was shocked. He sighed and said, Yu Yu, are you a relationship expert? You've said the essence of it in one sentence. Yu Yu looked at him with disdain and said coldly, I can't be considered a relationship expert. This is what I've read in books. Gong Jie's lips curled into a smile. He felt that this little nephew of his who was still childish but spoke with such sharp words was too cute. I still can't understand women who see love as their everything. Yu Yu glanced at him from the corner of his eyes and asked nonchalantly, Uncle, have you been in a relationship before? Gong Jie frowned. Why are you asking this? Asking about your relationship history? Why can't I ask? I don't have a relationship history. Gong Jie replied. Yu Yu clicked his tongue and said disdainfully, No wonder. So you've never been in a relationship. Uncle, have you been with a woman? What? That means a relationship between a man and a woman without a romantic relationship. For example, a spiritual partner? Yu. Pfft. Gong Jie couldn't help but spit a mouthful of red wine on Yu Yu's face. Yu Yu shut his eyes abruptly. His rosy cheeks were flushed red, and he instantly looked a little disheveled. His long and thick eyelashes, in particular, were stained with the wine. His delicate brows furrowed slightly in displeasure, but he managed to keep his emotions under control and did not explode. Gong Jie looked at him blankly and said apologetically, Yu Yu, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. You didn't want to bother with him. He took a warm handkerchief and carefully wiped his face clean. Chapter 1823. Gong Jie's mind was in a mess. Please, it wasn't that he didn't pay attention to his manners, it was that he couldn't tolerate it. Stuff. Okay? What was a physical relationship? Who had ever seen such words coming out of the mouth of a 7-year-old child? Had anyone ever seen it before? Therefore, he was caught off guard and was caught off guard. This child was really a mischievous child. Gong Jie held back his laughter and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What do you mean by a physical relationship? What do you mean by your little brain can't think? A physical relationship is a relationship between a man and a woman that is maintained purely from a biological point of view. If I were to use a simpler term to describe it, it would be bed partners. Gong Jie was dumbfounded. Yu tilted his head elegantly and asked calmly, "Why? Am I wrong? What nonsense is your little brain thinking about all day? How do you even know about this, cough, cough?" Gong Jie was once again flustered. He felt that it was a little too far-fetched. Yu smiled and said, "I've been studying psychology and sociology recently." "Yes, that's what I've been studying recently." Gong Jie lectured him sternly, "It's too early for you to be concerned about this. I've always been so ahead of myself. It's good to spend more effort on your studies." Gong Jie smiled and said, "Don't look at this messy psychology. Have you revised your homework?" Yu curled his lips in disdain and said casually, "I've already prepared my homework for the third-year science course in high school. So, it's really boring normally." Gong Jie was still dumbfounded. "You're lying? How was that possible? He was only in elementary school at this age. How could he understand such profound knowledge in high school? He had already prepared for it. That was so unbelievable." Gong Jie took a deep breath and found it hard to believe. Yu said disdainfully, "These questions are very simple. I'll know them after flipping through the books once. As for the humanities, I'm not interested. Anyway, it's all rote memorization. I'm not interested in preparing for it." Gong Jie. No wonder this child's EQ was so high. It turned out that he spent all his extra time studying psychology. That was too scary. When his sister gave birth to him, she must have had a genetic mutation to give birth to such a shocking genius. "I'm guessing that you've never been in a relationship before," Mommy's actions. In fact, women were more emotional creatures, and most of them lacked a sense of security. That's why they values their families as family. "Actually, I understand Mommy. Mommy's right, Mommy. 'Tis her, this her dearest." Therefore, in order to protect her family, she did not hesitate to give up everything. Teet. Even if I told you, you wouldn't understand. You don't understand women. You make it sound like you know a lot, Gong Jie said indignantly. Mommy and I depended on each other since we were young. I'm the one who understands Mommy the most. Don't I have the right to speak? Gong Jie was speechless. I'm talking to a cow. I don't even have a woman at my age. You won't understand even if I explain it to you. You mocked. Chapter 1824. He suddenly glanced at him meaningfully from the corner of his eyes and snickered. Don't tell me. Uncle is still a pure and innocent virgin? Gong Jie's handsome face instantly flushed red with shyness. He furrowed his brows and tried to pretend to be calm, but even so, his body's reaction was very honest. Even the tips of his ears had turned red. Yu's mouth opened into an O shape. He was overjoyed. No wonder. It turns out that uncle is a little virgin. Gong Jie pretended to be serious and looked at Yu, who was snickering. He pretended to threaten him. Don't laugh. Gong Jie was furious. Yu, are you looking down on me? Of course. Uncle is already 24 years old. You probably haven't touched a woman's finger. Well, it's not that I haven't touched a woman. Gong Jie said unwillingly. Previously, I was drugged by a woman at a party. I almost died in her hands. Yu's eyes lit up when he heard that there was gossip to dig up. He curiously went forward and asked, What happened after that? I broke one of her hands. Yu was stunned. So violent? It was very like his style. Then, how did you solve it? Gong Jie cleared his throat awkwardly and coughed a few times. Suddenly he said, I soaked in an ice pool for a night. Yu Yu was dumbfounded. Uncle, are you so cruel to yourself? Gong Jie touched his forehead. Yu Yu smiled and said, Women are a very charming little animal. I feel that Mommy is a completely different person from before she fell in love. In the past, she was a standard career woman. She always liked to shoulder all the responsibilities on her own as if she was indestructible and could bear all the responsibilities. After she fell in love, she instantly turned into a clingy little mommy. Daddy spoiled her like a little princess. It was only after she fell in love that I realized how cute she was when she acted spoiled. Women still need to be pampered. Of course, this is something that some single dogs who have never been in a relationship will never understand. Gong Jie felt that he had been hit hard again. He was suddenly amused by Yu Yu's serious and innocent expression. He couldn't help but reach out and pinch his cheeks. Xiao Bao, how can you be so cute? You're so smart. His phone suddenly rang. Gong Jie glanced at the screen and saw that it was a call from Xianxia. He exchanged glances with Yu Yu. Yu gave him a look, and Gong Jie immediately picked up the phone. Sis, little Jie. Xianxia's slightly helpless and guilty voice came from the other end. Now, I shouldn't have been so fierce to you. Sis was wrong. I didn't do it on purpose. Xianxia's voice sounded helpless and weak. After she calmed down, she realized that her tone had been very hurtful. In her guilt, she called him to apologize. I'm being overly sensitive. Perhaps you're hiding it from me because you have a reason that you have to tell me. But in my eyes, you're still the innocent and cute little Jie in my heart. The things I said before were all done on impulse. I wasn't serious. Don't take it to heart. When Gong Jie heard this, he smiled slightly and his heart suddenly softened. Chapter 1825. Upon hearing this, Xianxia's expression softened. Gong Jie had always been like this. When she was young, he couldn't bear to see anyone bully her. In the past, whenever she was bullied by older children, he would always be the first to protect her. He was like her guardian angel, always the first to appear by her side. She still remembered that once, Xiao Jie got into a fight with a group of children to protect her. There were many of them, and he could only fight alone. Naturally, he could not win against them all. He was covered in injuries and his face was bruised and swollen. She was so scared that she cried herself hoarse. She tried to go forward a few times, but he pushed her away. In the end, it was the adults who rushed over. Only then did the group of children stop and disperse. However, he was beaten until he almost fainted. That was the most overboard incident. It was also the incident that left the deepest impression on her. Xianxia said, I know. As for my identity, I'll find a suitable time to tell you. Okay. After hanging up, Gong Jie and Yu Yu gave each other a high five. I told you. Mommy will definitely regret being so fierce to you. She's the most soft-hearted. Yu Yu was the one who knew his mother best. After the engagement banquet ended, Xianxia actually did as he promised and obediently sent over a big red packet. Xianxia opened it and saw that it was a 7-figure sum. It was a generous gift, and she did not know whether to laugh or cry. She could almost imagine Xianxia's aggrieved expression at this moment. She didn't expect that her unintentional joke would be taken seriously by him. When she returned to her room, she looked at the mountain of presents and felt happy and sweet. At this moment, she finally understood why the bride was the happiest woman in the world on the day of her wedding. It was probably because every relationship went through ups and downs before finally bearing fruit. Being able to spend time with the person you love was probably the most blissful expression. At this moment, a line from a song suddenly flashed across her mind. I've finally waited for you. Luckily, I didn't give up. Happiness comes with great difficulty, so people cherish it even more. Suddenly, the sound of approaching footsteps came from behind. Xianxia suddenly came back to her senses. Just as she was about to turn around, a pair of strong arms tightly wrapped around her waist. Mu Yaja hugged her from behind and pulled her into his embrace. He lowered his eyelashes and buried his handsome face in her hair, greedily sniffing the fragrance of her hair. What are you thinking about? His gentle and magnetic voice was close to her ears. His warm breath constantly brushed against her elegant and enchanting neck, but it caused her entire body to tremble. Just as she shrunk her shoulders back, who would have thought that he would suddenly press against her ear and intimately suck on her cute little earlobe, but it caused her heart to beat like thunder. What? Don't be like this. Xianxia gently pushed him away. Being teased like this, she felt a little ticklish, so she rebuked, "You're making me itchy like this. Who asked you to be so seductive and seduced me? Don't tell me you're allowed to push me away?" The man smiled, but he was not forced back by her rejection. Instead, he became even more aggressive. He bit her earlobe and intimately sucked on it. After a few teasing, her face immediately reacted and spread like a fire. The blush spread from her cheeks to her ears, and even her body was slightly hot. Chapter 1826. Don't. Xianxia couldn't stand the tickling and giggled. His breath on her neck made her unbearable. Just as she was about to beg for mercy, he grabbed her shoulders and suddenly turned her body around. He hugged her waist and supported her forcefully. Wuxia lowered his gaze, admiring her bashful and seductive look, especially her pair of well-defined eyes. Her eyelashes fluttered like butterfly wings, which accentuated her coquettishness. She looked extremely seductive when she smiled. "Little idiot, do you know?" Wuxia nodded and leaned closer to her. He looked at her from an extremely close distance. Their lips were connected and the tips of their noses were touching. Even her eyelashes could feel the touch of his face clearly. Such an intimate distance made her heart beat like a drum. Every sound seemed to be echoing in her ears. He pressed his lips against hers and breathed out, but left a sentence that made her face burn even more. "You're so beautiful right now." Xianxia was so shy that she couldn't understand. She clenched her fists nervously and didn't know how to respond to him. Even if it wasn't the first time they were intimate, her reaction was still like a young girl. She bit her lips shyly and didn't know how to react. She clasped her hands behind her back and intertwined her fingers tightly together. Her delicate lips were stiff as if they were tightly pressed together. His praise carried a hint of ambiguity. No matter how stupid she was, she could feel that his body was tense at this moment, all of which was telling her that he desired her. "Do you know? I've been holding it in until now. I really want to take you." Wuxia whispered sweet nothings into her ear, but it made her heart beat faster and she couldn't resist. She didn't realize that when this man said sweet nothings, he could be so deadly and bewitching. She pursed her lips and half rejected him. "That's not very good, right? Right now, it's not nighttime yet. You don't have to care so much." Wuxia hugged her and wanted to kiss her red lips. Xianxia avoided him again. Looking at his urgent attack, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Wait, the curtains are still open." She blushed as she looked at the wide open floor-to-ceiling window in shock. She wanted to signal him to close the window. However, Wuxia was indifferent. He didn't care if the window was closed or not. He held her in his arms and couldn't wait to kiss those delicate lips that were silently seducing him. Once he kissed her, he couldn't bear to part. He hugged her tightly and couldn't bear to let go. The deep kiss made her blush. Window. Wuxia didn't have the patience to listen to her. No man liked to drag things out, especially when he had endured for such a long time. It wasn't easy for him to deal with those annoying fellows and finally have some private space with her. Hence, some things naturally had to be done in a race against time. Chapter 1827. Her heart calmed down a little. In the next second, her body was in free fall and fell onto the soft Simmons bed. Because of the elasticity, her body bounced a few times and quickly sank into it. The man's tall body covered her and pinned her down, making her unable to move. Xianxia complained in grievance, "Wu, you're so heavy." Just as she finished speaking, she heard the man's low laughter. In the next moment, he hugged her and turned around. When she reacted, she had already switched positions with him. He was lying on the bed, and she, on the other hand, was already straddling him in an extremely suggestive posture. A certain point coincidentally allowed her to clearly feel the slightest change in his body. It was menacing, but it made her heart beat like thunder. The man teased her and held her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. He teasingly asked, "Looks like you prefer to take the initiative?" When Xianxia heard this, her face became even hotter. Luckily, the room was dark at this moment, so the man did not see her embarrassed expression. She was not used to this position. Sitting on top of him like this made her feel very uneasy. It was inevitable that she was at a loss. In this aspect, compared to men's aggressive attacks, women were often more passive. It was difficult for them to take the initiative to conquer a man. To her, this was an even more difficult problem to overcome. However, Wuxia was extremely interested. He wanted to see how charming and enchanting it would be if she was on top. However, with this idea in mind, this woman was not enlightened. She was stunned for a long time and did not move. Wuxia reached out his hand and touched her cheek, across her shoulder and neck. At the same time, he easily untied the silk sash on her back. The gown immediately slid off her shoulders, revealing her chest. She lowered her head and helplessly bit her lips. She was at a loss as to what to do. Her helpless look made him laugh. "What? You don't know what to do?" The man's question made her even more embarrassed and at a loss. From the beginning to the end, she lowered her head, not knowing how to respond or what to do. The man chuckled and said, "What an idiot." Taking advantage of the situation, he took off her clothes and climbed onto her shoulders and neck. Then he moved his hands all the way down, carrying out a mysterious exploration. Xianxia bit her lips. Her face was so hot that it was about to burn. He took off the gown on her body, and the beauty in front of him was almost unobstructed. She didn't know what to do, so she could only freeze and let him explore her body. When he went deeper, she couldn't help but feel a little helpless, so she couldn't help but tense up. The man is evil charming smile, loved her so shy appearance, kissed her lips, pried open her lips, with a strong offensive, all the way to the deep invasion. She involuntarily moaned. When she came back to her senses, she realized that she had involuntarily moaned. However, she felt even more ashamed and covered her mouth. It was a little embarrassing. Why couldn't she hold it in? How could she? The more she thought about it, the more embarrassed she felt. "I like it." He kissed her soothingly. "I like your voice. You're not allowed to suppress yourself." Xianxia pursed her lips, but she also noticed the tension in the man's voice. Chapter 1828. That was the place where he was most sensitive. When she kissed him just now, this action was more like a silent provocation. The man felt an electric shock spread all the way to his limbs and bones, especially. Since the wedding, he had been enduring himself until now. There were some things that did not need to be secretive anymore. It was better to be more direct. Thus, he nimbly took off her gown. To him, the current her was even more stunning than when she was in her gown. His body also started to become excited. In this position, he took possession of her. From the initial gentle invasion, until later he could no longer hold himself back and gradually became fierce. Wuxia, she became more and more uneasy from his fierce attack and could not help but softly call out his name. Her weak voice was like a kitten's, but she did not know that this made it harder for him to restrain himself. The emotions that he had suppressed for a long time were like stormy waves, instantly drowning her. In the midst of the extreme joy, she was a little helpless. In the midst of his emotions, he could not help but lean close to her ear and bite her earlobe, murmuring her name over and over again. Sure, he gently called out her name. His charming voice made people unable to resist him. She closed her eyes and allowed herself to sink into it. When she fell into it, she was drenched in sweat. Gradually, she could not take it anymore. She panted and her breathing lost its frequency and became a little hurried. "Don't. Slow down." She was a little unable to bear his overbearing possession, but she could not muster any strength at all. She could only beg for mercy weakly. Unfortunately, her pleas for mercy did not enter his ears at all, and he allowed his senses to continue to work on her. When it ended, she finally could not take it anymore and collapsed in his arms. Her entire body was soft and powerless. She nestled in his arms and panted hurriedly like a patient who could not breathe on her own. He looked at her and felt that her current appearance was both cute and funny. It was just one round, but she was so disappointing that she collapsed. He really did not know what to say about her. "Didn't I tell you to train more? You're so weak." He scolded her in dissatisfaction, but his tone couldn't hide the adoration. She was panting, but her entire body was in a daze. Whatever he said, she couldn't hear a single word as she focused on regulating her own breathing. Wuxia didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He also couldn't bear to torment her anymore. He hugged her and fell on the bed, constantly stroking her back. He knew that she probably didn't sleep well last night. That was why he was in such a sorry state when dealing with matters of the heart. He hugged her, his fingers going through her hair as he pulled her head into his embrace. Even if there was a part of his body that was not satisfied yet, he could not bear to take her anymore. There was no hurry to continue once she recovered her strength. He couldn't torment her too much. The next time this stupid woman saw him, he was afraid that her legs would go weak. Under his comforting words, her breathing gradually calmed down. She leaned against his chest and closed her eyes. Just now, for a moment, she felt that her brain was short of oxygen and her entire body was floating in the clouds. This man, in this aspect, was extremely strong. He always had the ability to torment her until she fell apart. At that time, he was sitting back and admiring her seductive posture. The more he looked, the more he couldn't bear to let go. Chapter 1829. Suddenly, there was the sound of footsteps outside the door. Wuxia was alerted and furrowed his brows. Then, there was a knock on the door. Xianxia's voice passed through the door and into their ears. "Daddy, Mommy, are you there?" Hearing little Ichen's voice, Xianxia was jolted back to her senses from her exhaustion. She was greatly startled. Before they could react, a click was heard. It seemed to be the sound of the door opening from the outside. Seeing that no one was responding, Ichen actually swaggered through the door. "Daddy, Mommy?" Ichen had already walked through the door with a confused look on his face. When Xianxia realized that the child had already walked through the door, she was so shocked that she wanted to scream. "Oh my God! Why wasn't the door locked?" Wuxia, on the other hand, was extremely calm as he pulled the blanket over her body. He, on the other hand, elegantly covered himself with his suit jacket. He was considered fully armed. He didn't make a sound, but he didn't expect that Ichen didn't walk in at all. The room was divided into two areas. One was the walk-in closet and the living room, and the other was the bedroom. The two areas were separated by an arched door, and the bedroom was at the innermost area. Therefore, when Ichen walked in, he first walked around the living room. When he didn't see anyone, he said, "Oh," and turned to leave the room. How could this naive little fellow have guessed that at this moment, his daddy and mommy were having some kind of friendly conversation? However, due to his good upbringing, he didn't take another step inside. After all, he had been taught etiquette since he was young. When he entered someone's room, without the owner's permission, he would never step into the bedroom. Therefore, he didn't even walk into the bedroom. When he saw that there was no one in the living room, he went straight out. He closed the door on his way out. Xianxia's heart finally settled down. It seemed like it was a false alarm. After being frightened by Ichen, he broke out in a cold sweat. Wuxia lowered his eyes and saw that she was still in shock. He couldn't help but laugh and pinched her cheek. "This one won't be scared? What a coward!" Xianxia glared at him angrily. He still had the nerve to say that. She was so angry that she was speechless. She hit him on the shoulder and said coquettishly, "Why didn't you remember to lock the door when you came in?" "I forgot." When he opened the door and saw her back, he was completely mesmerized. How could he remember that the door was unlocked? He was only looking at her. Naturally, he couldn't care about anything else. "You forgot." Xianxia didn't know whether to laugh or cry. If the child came in just now and saw such a scene, how awkward would that be? His casual remark about forgetting to lock the door gave her quite a scare. Wuxia, however, did not seem to realize his mistake at all. "It's fine. He doesn't know." Yun Shirshir was speechless. This son of his didn't know anything about the matters between men and women. If he walked in and saw them, he would probably only blush, but he wouldn't know what they were doing. Yun Shirshir didn't know what to say to him. "Go and lock the door," she urged. Mu Yaja smiled playfully and caressed her burning cheek. "Lock the door? But you still want to?" Chapter 1830. However, Mu Yaja wanted to tease her. Therefore, even though her cheeks were unreasonably hot, he still said, "If that's not what you mean, then what do you mean? Aren't you just worried that if the door isn't locked, you'll be disturbed again?" Yun Shirshir was embarrassed to death by him. She immediately pushed his shoulder and glared at him, but there was a hint of wanting to say something. "You're bullying me. This life can be considered to be in your hands." She was angry, but the corners of her lips gradually lifted into a smile. She was at her wits' end when it came to this man's occasional bad taste. It was obvious that he was making fun of her. However, she was very thin-skinned, so she couldn't do anything to him. He hugged her but smiled. "What do you mean by your life is in my hands? You sound so wronged when you say that. Isn't that so?" Yun Shirshir pouted coquettishly. "All right. Whatever you say, it's the law." Mu Yaja hugged her and coaxed her softly, magnanimously not caring about her quick tongue. He got off the bed, went to the door and locked it. Yun Shirshir's heart finally settled down. It seemed that if the door wasn't locked, she wouldn't feel safe. Mu Yaja turned around. As he moved, the suit on his body suddenly fell to the ground. In an instant, his perfect figure, which was like a sculpture of a god, was exposed to the air. But he didn't feel embarrassed at all, so he walked over in such a grand manner. Yun Shirshir glanced at him. Her gaze fell on his golden ratio figure, which was comparable to an international model's. His sexy abs and mermaid line were filled with an extremely seductive aura, especially that pair of strong and powerful arms, which made him even more beautiful and suffocating. As she looked, her face couldn't help but turn as red as blood. Even though the two of them were already considered intimate, at this moment, she still felt her face burning when she looked at his naked body. Mu Yaja saw that her deer-like gaze was fixed on him from beginning to end. The corners of his lips curled up slightly, but he smiled playfully. "Have you seen enough?" Yun Shirshir was stunned. When she came back to her senses, she met his mischievous eyes. She pursed her lips. "You should put on your clothes." "Wear clothes?" Mu Yaja smiled wickedly. "I thought you liked it. Seeing you staring at me like that, I thought you liked it." Mu Yaja. He was making fun of her again. Yun Shirshir was so angry that she was at a loss for words. In the end, she was so angry that she laughed. He walked forward and hugged her. At that moment, he was extremely greedy for this brief moment of warmth between the two of them. The two of them fooled around on the bed for a while. Yun Shirshir was tossed around by him until she was exhausted. As a result, she actually fell asleep in his arms. Mu Yaja saw that she was so tired that she fell asleep. He didn't want to disturb her. He folded the quilt for her, kissed her forehead, and left the room. At this moment, it was already close to evening. When Mu Yaja walked out of the room, Lu Jinyu and Xianxia had already been waiting for him at the door for a long time. When they saw that he was fully dressed and looked energetic, the tacit understanding between the brothers made them immediately feel the subtle changes in his body at this moment. It seemed that boss and sister-in-law had returned to the room and must have had a good time. Chapter 1831. In his impression, Mu Yaja had always been an ascetic man. Little did he know that his boss was actually a man who was passionate on the inside. On the surface, he looked dull, but deep down, he was still very ahem. It could only be understood, only understood. Xianxia put aside these random thoughts and walked up to him. He then whispered a few words into his ear. Upon hearing this, Mu Yaja nodded and pursed his thin lips slightly. There was a medical center in the castle that was set up for emergencies. When he was preparing for the engagement ceremony, he had considered the possibility of an emergency, so he specially deployed a medical team from the island. He did not expect it to come in handy. At this moment, Mu Linfeng was in a rather bad mood. When Mu Yaja arrived, Mu Shumin was lying on the bed with a pale and lifeless face. His face was unbearably swollen because of the blood clots, especially the corners of his eyes and mouth, which required several stitches. Although the wound would heal, it would inevitably leave a scar and there was a risk of disfigurement. It was said that Mu Shumin had a few broken ribs and his nose bridge was also broken. Gong Jie's subordinates were vicious and merciless. They did not hold back when they attacked, and it was obvious that they wanted to kill her. Mu Yaja had the ability to stop him, but he did not do so. Mu Shumin could not blame anyone for his current state. His mouth had offended someone he should not have, so who could he blame? When Mu Linfeng saw him, his heart was in a mess and he had nowhere to vent his anger. When he saw a certain man appear in front of him with a stern expression, Mu Linfeng felt that his dignity was being challenged. "You still have the cheek to come here?" Mu Yaja sneered and did not give her any face when he spoke. "I didn't want to come over, but today is my engagement. Who would want to come to the ward and bring bad luck upon themselves?" "You?" Mu Linfeng was so angry that he was at a loss for words. His face was extremely ashen, but after taking a deep breath, a cold smile appeared on his face. "Ah, good, very good. You little rascal, why didn't I realize that you were so capable before?" Today, he and Mu Shumin had rushed over with the intention of watching a joke. Initially, when he heard that Mu Yaja wanted to hold an engagement ceremony on the island, he thought it was ridiculous. Hence, his attitude was extremely contemptuous. It seemed that this brat really wanted to rebel. He actually stole the funds from the company's account and held this engagement without alerting the Mu group. It looked like he had turned a deaf ear to his words. Under Mu Linfeng's orders, Mu Shumin even went to check the financial group's account, but in the end, she made a huge blunder. Mu Yaja had never used any funds in the Mu group's accounts. Most of the funds were from the financial groups. It was surprising that Mu Yaja did not use a single cent from the family's accounts for such a big matter. Initially, when he said that he wanted to marry Xianxia, Mu Linfeng was furious and said that if he had the ability to get married, he should not use a single cent of the Mu family's capital. Mu Yaja agreed immediately, but on the surface, he seemed to be dismissive. Mu Linfeng thought that he was just boasting. Did he think that he could hold a grand wedding on his own after leaving the Mu group? Chapter 1832. Thus, Mu Linfeng did not think too much about it at the time. He only thought that his young and hot-blooded nephew was just being impulsive. At most, he would only be fierce with his words and talk on paper. How would he have the capital to hold such a grand wedding if he did not use the company's account? However, when they rushed over to take a look, Mu Linfeng and Mu Shumin were so angry that they almost vomited blood. Without using the Mu family's capital, this engagement was not only held in a dignified manner, but it was also grand and sensational. How did his nephew do it? How did he manage to arrange such a grand event and even invite so many important guests? How did he manage to make an engagement ceremony that was even grander than the formal weddings of some of the rich and powerful families? How did he manage to do it? Mu Linfeng couldn't help but feel suspicious. Without using the company's account, how did he manage to make the ceremony so luxurious and dignified? Mu Linfeng was suspicious at once. In fact, although he was old and no longer as spirited and vigorous as when he was young, it didn't mean that he was stupid. All these years, be it Mu Yaja nurtured his power outside or set up his own businesses, even if he kept the Mu family under wraps and didn't leak any clues, it didn't mean that Mu Linfeng wasn't vigilant at all. He already had his suspicions long ago. Even if Mu Yaja's businesses couldn't compete with the Mu group's power for the time being, with his ability and capability, he was still young and capable. With his plans for himself, it wouldn't be long before he replaced the Mu group in a few years' time. Moreover, in recent years, his backbone had gradually shifted toward his private businesses. He even grafted many resources that originally belonged to the Mu group to the businesses under his name. He vaguely realized that this fellow had some selfish motives. However, he couldn't find any evidence. Moreover, he was preoccupied with handling the Mu family's affairs and didn't have the energy to keep up. He thought that as long as this fellow didn't go overboard, he could pretend that he didn't know. Moreover, he didn't find anything fishy. One thing he was certain of was that, in this aspect, Mu Yaja had handled it flawlessly and had managed to hide it from his discerning eyes. Thus, Mu Linfeng only had suspicions and didn't have any concrete evidence. However, today's engagement banquet once again aroused his suspicions. He had originally come with the intention of watching a joke, but in the end he was ruthlessly slapped by Mu Yaja. Mu Linfeng only felt his old face burning from the slap, which was extremely embarrassing. Mu Yaja's engagement banquet today was truly an honor for his family. He had never seen anyone's engagement banquet on such a scale. Even in the world, only the world-shocking British royal wedding of the century could compare. However, it was not easy to compare a wedding and an engagement. Perhaps, this kid's wedding in the future would be even more sensational than this engagement banquet. It might even attract the attention of the world. With his temperament, he would probably do so. Mu Linfeng, on the other hand, was perplexed. He did not know where the young man got his strength from to be able to do this. Chapter 1833. Could it be that this brat had gone to the extent of borrowing money to support this event? Judging by the looks of it, this engagement banquet could not have been held without spending tens of millions of yuan. Could it be that he had owed tens of millions of yuan just to fulfill a promise and for this woman? However, he was not in the mood to care about this at the moment. The biggest surprise at this engagement banquet was that mysterious man. Mu Shumin was ruthlessly taught a lesson at the engagement banquet. However, Mu Linfeng knew that this had nothing to do with anyone else. It was purely Mu Shumin's own cheap mouth. Mu Linfeng admitted that he had always felt that Mu Shumin was not a calm person. She did things in a high-profile manner, especially when she spoke fiercely and aggressively. It was easy for her to cause trouble from her mouth. Maybe it was because she had always been the core member of the Mu clan, so she was used to looking down on others. After all, the Mu clan had a prominent position in the capital. It could be said that the Mu clan was a prestigious clan that could cover the sky with one hand. Which clan had the ability to compete with the Mu clan? However, one had to remember that there was always someone better out there. It was not that there was no one who was more powerful than her. Today, he had really been slapped in the face. While Mu Linfeng was furious, he also felt that he had been utterly humiliated by Mu Shumin. However, that brat was a little too arrogant. His words of flattening the Mu family overnight still left a lingering fear in his heart. What kind of monstrous power did this brat have to be able to say such words? Mu Linfeng was attentive and heard that sentence. I want her life. She bullied my sister and deserved to die. Otherwise, do you think that the Gong family can be bullied by any Tom, Dick, or Harry? Mu family? Who do you think you are? Do you think that the Mu family can do whatever you want and bully others? I'd like to see if the Mu family or the Gong family is more capable. The Gong family? Mu Linfeng was stunned at that moment. He could tell that this young man's features were similar to Xianxia's and that they were related by blood. The two of them were probably siblings and had a close relationship. However, this man's self-introduction and provocation of the Mu family's reputation left him in a state of shock. The Gong family? Mu Linfeng knew of such a family. The Gong family of North America was a huge Chinese family that controlled a world-renowned arms group. Although he was unwilling to admit it, the Gong family's power was more impressive than the Mu family's. The Mu group was powerful because it had the support of Juanfeng. It had been established for 100 years, and its roots were deeply rooted. However, the Mu family's power and influence. The Gong family was a huge family that controlled the war situation of the entire world. No matter who was involved in the Gong family's internal affairs, they would not take the Mu group seriously. However, this brat's of course. Could it be the Gong family that had a thunderous reputation? That meant Xianxia is related to the Gong family. Mu Linfeng says as if they offended the Gong family, it might not be a good thing for Mu group. Who is that man? Mu Linfeng questioned him. Who are you talking about? The man who gave the order to beat Shumin into such a miserable state. Who else could I be talking about? Chapter 1834. Mu Yaja smirked. As you can see, that man has a powerful background. Auntie has offended him. Not only did she suffer today, but her life may also be in danger in the future. I can only hope that he doesn't take this matter to heart. Given that rascal's character, he'll bear grudges against anyone who touches his sister. Mu Linfeng's heart skipped a beat. Even he said so. It seemed that the man's identity was as he had guessed. It seemed that he was indeed from the Gong family. It seemed that the feud between the Gongs and the Muse was unavoidable. At the thought of this, Mu Linfeng suddenly felt a little resentful. This Mu Shumin was always stirring up trouble for him. Usually, he could ignore those small fries, but this time, she had offended a big shot. How could he not be angry? Now that Mu Shumin was still unconscious in bed, she did not know how big of a mess she had gotten into. In the end, would he not have to take responsibility for it? However, did Mu Linfeng not think about it? Could he really do it? What puzzled him the most was, when did Xianxia get in touch with the Gongs? Was she not the Yun family's adopted daughter? Could it be? Was she an illegitimate daughter of the Gongs? This was not impossible. Mu Linfeng was no stranger to the Gong family. Speaking of which, the Gong and Mu families had some history with each other. The head of the Gongs, Gong Xiaoying, had some personal grudges with the Muse. Mu Linfeng also had some inkling of the past between Gong Xiaoying and Mu Sheng. Hence, the Gongs were an extremely fearsome existence to the Muse. Could it be that Xianxia was Mu Wanru and Gong Xiaoying's daughter? At this thought, he felt even more restless. Mu Yaja glanced at Mu Shumin and expressionlessly said, "When she wakes up, second uncle, take her away from here. Don't let her spoil our mood." His words were a little hurtful. The corners of Mu Linfeng's lips twitched violently. He looked at him sharply like an eagle and sneered. "Are you chasing us away?" "It's not that chasing is so unpleasant to hear. It's just that it's a little inappropriate for you guys to appear here. Now that the Gongs are here, second uncle, don't tell me you want to make a big scene." "You!" Mu Linfeng slammed the table and stood up, pointing at him and scolding. "You be asterisk starred. Which side are you on exactly? No matter what, she's still your aunt. It's fine if you don't care when she's being bullied right under your nose. But now that she's injured, not only do you not care, you even chase us away. Is this appropriate? I'm not on anyone's side." He only stood by his lady. Whoever bullied his wife's wife was his enemy. On the contrary, he was happy to see Gong Jie make a move on Mu Shumin. Given his status, it was indeed inappropriate for him to attack Mu Shumin. Gong Jie was different, though. Mu Yaja sneered. "Even if he doesn't do anything, I won't sit back and do nothing. Aunt has gone overboard today. Since she spoke too fast, she should pay the price, shouldn't she?" Mu Linfeng was speechless. Chapter 1835. "Second uncle, you're being too courteous. However, you don't have to give me any face. You just have to think of a way to protect yourself. When the time comes, it'll be fine as long as you don't drag me down." Mu Yaja left after saying that. He had only come over to check if Mu Shumin was still breathing. He had thought that Mu Shumin would be on the verge of death after Gong Jie's men had hit her so hard. However, he did not expect her to be so tough. In that case, there was no need for him to stay any longer. It wasn't that he was cold and heartless. He was indifferent to everyone in the Mu family. Whether they lived or died, it had nothing to do with him. Being able to make the scene look presentable was already the greatest dignity he had left for the Mu family. Mu Linfeng watched Mu Yaja leave. Looking at his cold and threatening back, he suddenly felt that he could not keep this chess piece around. In the past, he had thought that he could still keep this rascal around if he could make him repent and cut ties with Xianxia. After all, in the entire Mu family, Mu Yaja's talent and ability were unparalleled. His position was also unshakable. Mu Linfeng had originally wanted to hand the Mu group over to him so that he could achieve more glory and create a bigger empire. Mu Linfeng's original plan was to make use of him to expand his territory and expand the Mu group's territory. Mu Linfeng's original plan had been well thought out. However, Mu Yaja's attitude now made him bitterly disappointed. The chess piece that he had painstakingly nurtured now had his own thoughts and opinions. Most importantly, as he continued to become more powerful, he gradually began to go against his ideals. This was not something that Mu Linfeng wanted to see. Mu Linfeng was worried that if this continued, the Mu group would fall into Mu Yaja's hands. If this rascal had selfish motives and started to transfer the Mu group's resources to his own businesses, then the Mu group would be emptied sooner or later. He might do that. He could see that the rascal was very ambitious. It might not be a good thing for the Mu group to fall into his hands. The Mu empire that he had worked so hard for so many years might end up in someone else's pocket. The foundation that he had worked so hard for would end up in someone else's pocket in the end. In the end, it would all be for naught. Wouldn't that be a joke? No one knew a son better than his father. Although Mu Yaja was not his biological son, he had nurtured him for so long that he had some understanding of his character and methods. Thus, Mu Linfeng had no choice but to consider grooming the next successor. After much thought, he could not come up with a name list. Although the Mu group was huge and had plenty of talented people, no matter how capable they were, they could not be compared to Mu Yaja and could not be mentioned in the same breath. Most of them were just jesters, and only a few of them were clear-headed. However, compared to Mu Yaja's business talent, they were still barely passable. Mu Linfeng had once predicted that there would not be a second person as brilliant as Mu Yaja in the Mu family within 100 years. Mu Linfeng was heartbroken at the thought of the person he had painstakingly nurtured going against him. He wanted to vomit blood, but he could not voice his bitterness. However, there was no other choice now. Mu Linfeng could only leave with Mu Shumin dejectedly. Chapter 1836. Along the way, Lu Jinyu could not help but shudder at the thought of how Mu Yaja had argued with Mu Linfeng earlier. "Chief, aren't you afraid that the old man will make things difficult for you if you keep arguing with him?" Lu Jinyu said half-jokingly, "That old man is probably worried that you're here to usurp the throne. He's probably going to start looking for ways to cultivate his power again. When that happens, the situation will be disadvantageous to you." Mu Yaja looked at him calmly and nonchalantly. "Are you kidding me?" Lu Jinyu was stunned. Mu Yaja said coldly, "Do I still need to be afraid of him now?" "But, no buts." Mu Yaja interrupted him without allowing him to object. "I've already endured to the limit for today. Now that I've made my stand clear, that old man is just a salted fish struggling on his deathbed even if he wants to salvage something. After using me for so long, now that I've made my stand clear, he'll definitely find a way out for himself. Unfortunately, it's too late for that now." He had long realized that Mu Linfeng's so-called treating him as his own was in fact for his own benefit. The so-called thinking for his sake and wanting to protect his position in the Mu group was just too nice to hear. In the end, it was just for his own benefit and to protect his empire. Mu Sheng was still around, so he had no choice but to restrain himself in order to preserve the family's reputation. However, once Mu Sheng's last breath was gone, he would definitely make a move. All this while, Mu Linfeng had indeed treated him as his own and nurtured him wholeheartedly. However, the so-called nurturing was nothing more than using him to strengthen the Mu group before kicking him out of the door and enjoying the fruits of his labor. There was no such thing in this world, though. He had been used for so long, it was time for him to retaliate. This war had just begun. "Chief, don't worry. With us brothers around, we'll definitely serve you until the end," Lu Jinyu said with a smile. Mu Yaja's lips curled up, but his eyes were sharp as he revealed a confident smile. That night, there was going to be a bonfire dance party by the beach. The venue had already been set up. Thousands of tons of fireworks had been flown by air and were now arranged in the venue. These fireworks were all custom-made. Mu Yaja had put in a lot of effort. Yun Shirshir changed into a gown and held Mu Yaja's hand. When they arrived at the venue, Yu Yu and Gong Jie were fiddling with delicate fireworks. "Uncle, I heard that when this firework is released, it will turn into a heart-shaped firework in the air," Yu said in surprise. Gong Jie, on the other hand, had rarely come into contact with such things. Even though his career had always involved him dealing with gunpowder, he had never personally given up on fireworks. Hence, at this moment, he was fiddling with them like a curious child. Are you setting off fireworks? Gong Jie shook his head. Nope. Then I'll release the explosives. Yun Shishir stood at the side. She did not know whether to laugh or cry as she watched the comical conversation between her uncle and nephew. She was about to step forward when she heard someone calling her from behind. Shishir. Yun Shishir turned around and saw Xiao Shui and Jiang Li. Chapter 1837. You flatter me. Yun Shishir smiled and held her hand. Sizing her up, she pursed her lips and smiled. You don't look bad in this outfit either. I heard that there's going to be a bonfire party at your engagement party, so I pestered my husband to buy this outfit for me. It's Chanel's new winter collection, and it costs a few thousand yuan. My husband's heart ached when he saw it. Jiang Li smiled shyly, but she felt quite happy when Yun Shishir praised her. Yun Shishir said, Your husband dotes on you a lot. What? I was the one who pestered him to buy it. He usually doesn't spend more than this when he buys me clothes. Jiang Li exaggeratedly raised a finger and sighed helplessly. It's rare for him to spend so much money, so I really envy you a lot. There are times when I really envy you. Look, why are you so lucky to be able to meet such a good man who pampers you like a little princess? As she spoke, she glanced at Mu Yaja with a blushing face. For some reason, she did not dare to look straight at this man who was as handsome as a god. Mu Yaja laughed. I only have one wife. If I don't pamper her like a princess, what if she runs away in anger? His humor made Jiang Li laugh heartily. At the same time, she was even more envious of Yun Shishir's good fortune. However, this envy was different from the jealousy of Yun Qinli and Yun Qingmiao. She too was sincerely wishing them well. Hence, she praised, Your husband is very handsome today too. The two of you look really compatible standing together. Mu Yaja smiled gracefully. Thank you. Jiang Li had a good impression of him due to his decent behavior. Compared to her slovenly husband, it was really infuriating to compare oneself to others. Xiao Shui, who was standing at the side, said, Shishir, Jiang Li has been infatuated with your husband today. You don't know this, but during the ceremony at noon, she couldn't take her eyes off your man. That saliva of hers, tiske. Yun Shishir chuckled. Really? Jiang Li panicked and grabbed Xiao Shui's hand. Don't mess with me. Since when did I drool? If Shishir hears this, she might misunderstand. All right. I'm just joking. Our Shishir knows my character. She won't take it seriously. Xiao Shui looked at Yun Shishir and asked, Am I right, Shishir? All right. You're the worst. Jiang Li gets shy easily. Don't tease her anymore. Yun Shishir asked, Why didn't you bring the child with you? When Jiang Li heard this, she frowned and said, I'm so angry just thinking about it. The child is so disappointing. I wanted to bring him over, but that guy kept wanting to play with you. But who would have thought that he would have a fever right before he set off? Recently, the temperature has been very low. Her fever is at 38 degrees Celsius. I have no choice but to leave her in the care of my mother-in-law. I can only do it myself. It's all right. When he recovers, he can play with you. There will be a chance in the future. Jiang Li smiled and said a little embarrassedly, That little guy seems to like you. He kept